A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. This week, that would be through chapter 19 of Shadows of Self by Mr. Branderson. Hey there, this is Cross.
I'm PJ.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club.
I have a bevy of liquids in front of me, Crossland. So today... Yeah, I think that's apt.
I have 5 vessels, is what I realized.
I've got 4.
I have 5 liquid vessels. Yeah. I have tea, which is on top of what you have. So, yeah. I assume.
Yeah.
Okay. So, PJ, we'll get to it in a second. Today is our third episode discussing Shadows of Self by Brandon Sanderson, and we are going to chat about chapters 14 through 19 as mentioned here. But before we get too far into it, PJ, tell me your 4 vessels. Please explain.
Well, Devil's Cut, we take a shot.
Yep.
So we've got a shot
1
glass.
For me and you.
I've got my cocktail.
2. 1 each.
I've got my beer.
Yep. 3.
And I've got a coffee mug of water.
Oh,
I guess 5 if you count the bottle that my beer is in.
That's bullshit. I refuse.
Okay. So what's yours?
Yours, but add tea.
Add tea. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Instead of a coffee mug of water, I have a Yeti of water. But
those Sasquatches, they don't like to sit very still. Hopefully they aren't knocking on your microphone too much.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not. PJ, what are you actually drinking though? What's that cocktail?
That cocktail I have decided to name Bleeder. Because it kind of looks bloody a little bit. But I didn't have any lime juice. I didn't have any limes, but I want to do sort of a sour. But I did have acid-adjusted pineapple juice, which I've talked about before, but I've been having a lot of fun experimenting with. And to refresh on that, it's essentially pineapple juice with citric and malic acid added to it in order to bring the acid levels up to that of lime juice. So it acts, as far as like recipe building and palate sort of feeling goes, like lime juice, but it tastes like pineapple. It's very cool, modern sort of thing that is happening in some like high-end cocktail circles. But I just kind of wanted to throw stuff together. So Bleeder is essentially a bourbon sour with green chartreuse and pineapple juice and a float of port. So it's 1.5 ounces of bourbon.
Brew stuff together indeed.
Yeah. 1.5 ounces of bourbon, 1/2 ounce of green chartreuse, 1/2 ounce of pineapple juice or acid adjusted pineapple juice, 1/2 ounce of simple syrup. And then I took 2 full large ice cubes instead of like 1 and like breaking one down for like agitation and more dilution. I just put 2 full ones in there and shook the shit out of it until it started essentially like slushifying a little bit.
Okay.
So then open poured that. So you've got the slushy and then 2 larger ice cubes. And then I floated port on top of that. And it kind of looks like when you... There's a shot, I think it's in, oh God, what movie or show? Oh, Whiplash. It's in Whiplash, where he's drumming and his fingers are like his hand is bleeding and he sticks it into that bucket of ice water. That's kind of the look that I got out of this.
So like the tendrils of the port is like reaching down into the drink.
I posted a picture of it in.
But be crazy if you put a picture of it on our website.
That'd be pretty cool, huh?
I mean, it'd be really cool if our website was capable of doing that.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got so many. I'm so sorry, everybody. I keep saying this, but I have so many of them like backed up, and I know what everyone is. I just need to fucking do it. So
don't say sorry. Just do it.
Yeah. Anyway, it actually worked out really well. I like it. It's a lot of aggressive flavors. I've been really liking the chartreuse with pineapple combination for whatever reason. It seems weird, but I mean, it's herbal and sweet, and it just, I think it kind of works. And then adding a fairly aggressive bourbon. I used Yellowstone, which is what I took a shot of earlier. And then this port isn't super sweet. I think it's a ruby, but it's pretty dry considering. So I made Kaylin a New York port lemonade a couple days ago, and she did not like it as much as the previous one because this is a much drier port.
Gotcha.
That Bogle one was fucking awesome. I need to pick up another one of those bottles.
Yeah, that sounded ridiculous. I recently made a port lemonade with a white port, and it was fantastic. Would recommend trying as well.
Yeah. Anyway, following that up is something pretty special. So Dangerous Man Brewing Company has become, I mean, they're fairly old at this point, but they kind of broke into the scene early on in the Minnesota craft beer sort of movement.
Mm-hmm.
But their big claim to fame was their peanut butter porter and their chocolate milk stout. And then you could order a pour of both of them together, getting chocolate and peanut butter. Really, really good, and made a name for themselves. And this is a bottle of their Imperial Peanut Butter Porter aged in Blanton bourbon barrels. And it is phenomenal. It's really, really good. And you get sort of the pseudo chocolate flavor from like the combination of just being a porter with the roasted malt and everything, but that sort of softness from sitting in that bourbon barrel for a while. And being a heavier malt bill to get it up to 11% compared to their, 5% standard worked out in its favor tremendously. So very, very, very good.
You are high on that beer. That's great.
I am.
Love it. It's awesome.
What are you drinking, Crossland?
I am having a really easy cocktail. It is called the Pin Cushion. It's a spin on the Boulevardier, which is generally considered a classic cocktail. So this is a pretty conventional drink, but it's not what you'd expect necessarily. I shouldn't say conventional drink. It's a conventional combination, but not a conventional cocktail itself. So what it is 1.5 ounces of rye, 3/4 ounce Campari, 3/4 ounce sweet vermouth, and a dash or a rinse of absinthe in your glass. And this is a drink that is built right in the glass as well. So this is not something that you stir or shake or do anything else. You're just throwing it in. You throw some ice in, you stir it, and drink it with the ice.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's in a double rocks glass. I thought it was in martini glass. For whatever reason.
No. Yeah, you typically wouldn't put ice in a martini glass.
That's why I thought it was weird.
No, yeah, it's in a double rocks lowball. So yes, it's very good. I'm actually using, so End of Days had a brand new release this week, which is their rye that they just put out, and it is fantastic. So I wanted to make a cocktail with it because I'm not going to make a whole ton of cocktails with it because it's just so fucking good on its own. But I wanted to while I still had a decent amount and I wasn't going to feel bad about it. So I was like, you know what? We'll commit. We'll try a Pin Cushion. And it's really tasty. Mm-hmm. It's only gotten better as the ice has gone away. I had like 2 sips right at the beginning, and I haven't had any until right now. And the ice cube is almost entirely gone. It's just super good.
Yeah, we definitely talked for like 40 minutes again today.
We did.
What
the devil's cut?
What is the difference between the Pin Cushion and a Boulevardier?
How good of you to ask, PJ. So a couple of differences. Well, it is the name. It's definitely the name. For one, PJ, one of the differences is the ratios themselves. So a Boulevardier is going to be 1.25 ounces of bourbon or rye, 1 ounce of Campari, 1 ounce of sweet vermouth, and an orange twist. So 2 different changes here are an increase in the rye count and then decreasing the Campari and vermouth and then adding absinthe.
Okay.
So for that little bit of anise throughout.
Mm-hmm. Did you do a twist over that?
I don't have oranges, so no.
Would you have?
Probably, just for like a little bit of the oil wash. But in all honesty, it's really good without. But just like a little bit of the oils probably would have gone and given it a little bit of freshness that I think that this is missing. But again, I wouldn't, I don't hold it against the drink. It's more of a me grocery shopping problem and trying to build things at the last minute.
Fair enough.
Like you and your acid pineapple with a lack of wine.
Yes. Yes, a little bit.
All right.
What are you following that up with anything?
Oh, yes, I am. I am following it up with a new anthem, Thought Police, which is a great beer that they have never put out before, but obviously a reference to 1984, a bunch of marching people. You've got It's really cool looking. Love New Anthem. A lot of their beers. This has been kind of a mainstay of theirs, but it's been one that they've only served in the tap room historically. So this is actually their first canning.
Okay. Style?
New England double, I think.
Okay. Nice.
Sorry, I'm just double checking here. This is IPA, so actually I don't think it's a double. I always forget if this one's the double or if the other one is, but because they've got a single and a double variant. But yeah, 7.7%. So it's a high. It's a big ol'.
That's a big one.
Left hand. Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Your hand seems to be improving a little bit.
Significantly better. Yeah. I'm no longer experiencing numbness. Just kidding. But it's fine. The thumb is the worst part right now. And like the shape of like sitting idly with the mouse on. I still have trouble articulating certain things. Like I was talking to Bingham earlier and it was like, can't open a pickle jar with my right hand. And Bingham goes, I open them with my left. And I'm like, no, you fucking don't. I don't believe you. Do you hold the jar with your right and open it with your left?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
You don't use your strongest hand to turn the big thing? Why?
I don't know. That
like
just
if it's a
natural.
hard jar?
Holding stuff with my right hand and manipulate. I also deal left-handed. Like I deal cards left-handed.
Right. I forgot that you're dumb. I got it. Yeah. Okay. So with that, we are going to go into the chapters. Actually, before we go into the chapters, PJ, how'd you feel about this week's penultimate reading?
This made me really appreciate Maracy. I think more than anything, I gained an intense appreciation for Maracy, and we'll get into that, I'm sure. But that's kind of my biggest takeaway from it.
Cool. That's great. This section, for me, solidifies the idea that these are two trilogies, so to speak, and that Alloy of Law really kind of is its own thing, because you see more of the reflection and mirrors here between the two trilogies and sort of inversion, I think. That said, I'm not like ruling out Alloy of Law. Alloy of Law is totally necessary reading, but you get to start to see some thematic resonance between the eras inside of this reading more and more and more.
Mm-hmm. I can see that.
So it's not that I don't think that you can skip Alloy of Law, and I don't think anyone should.
I think you
because
could.
You could.
After last week, I
benefit.
Think I believe that you could. I still don't think you should, though, and I think it's dumb that it's considered separate.
I mean, yeah, considered separate is one thing. Written to be a part of a series is another, right? So like
True.
That's the biggest difference to me, is like that novel is standalone. Not to say that you should read the standalone so that you can understand the series, but yeah.
Yep.
That's my whole thing with like, this will be brief. The First Law, right, is composed of 9 books, but 2 trilogies because 3 of the books are standalone, but you have to read the standalone books in order to love the second trilogy fully. Like you
so
have
does it go standalone, trilogy, standalone, trilogy, standalone?
No, it goes trilogy, standalone, 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 trilogy.
That's fucking stupid, and I disagree with you.
What do you mean?
Those are 3 in a row required,
but they're not
consecutive.
They're not a trilogy because they aren't connected immediately. There's nothing immediately that makes it necessary to read those books. And they're much more, for the record, they're much more disconnected than Alloy of Law is to this. So it's a little bit of an unfair comparison, wherein these are direct characters that are traded between the two, and they're main characters. It's literally the same points of view. So that's very different versus in the First Law standalone. So you've got a bevy of different characters with maybe 1 or 2 overlapping characters. And even then, they're minor sometimes.
Okay.
So the standalones in First Law are more like they share a world. And so like more context you have in the world, more better. This is a plot thread that is dangling.
Fair.
So that's my comparison. All right, cool. With that, let's get into our chapters here. We're going to start with chapter 14. Of course, we kick off this week's reading with Wax's perspective as he prowls over the streets. We keep using the analogy that he's like Batman during times like these, but this is like literally some of the most Dark Knight shit that he does inside this book. This week, he is like living his Batman life as best as he can. You know, he drops in and breaks up a riot near a rioting parlor in a Pathian sanctuary and drops in on a kid who literally shits himself and much, much more as he kind of hops around town in these moments.
Okay. We got to address this.
Yeah.
How many common criminals have shat themselves in Batman's presence? It's got to be a lot.
It's got to be a lot. It's got to be a lot. It's got to more than 4, you know?
Yeah.
Probably.
Go ahead. Oh, I was going to move on to the rioting and soothing parlors, but sorry.
Oh, no. All that I was going to say is like, we do like, this is Wax feels like Batman here. It's almost too, it's so on the nose sometimes that I'm like, oh man, this makes sense within the power set, and I definitely get it. And there's just some like superhero-ish nature here where I don't want to say it's as though the magic system is transformed and changed, but this starts to like blur that line a little bit between like what's a superhero, what's a magic user, a little bit more than conventional fantasy does.
Yeah.
That said, one of the big differences off the bat is a rule set to which things have to adhere. I get that. But
yeah, there's also the anonymity thing, which is not present at all here. Like there's no alter ego.
Yeah, specifically in a Batman comparison, that's not omnipresent with superheroes like Iron Man, for instance.
Yeah, but we're talking about Batman.
I know. I was trying to.
You might have been thinking about other superheroes, but you didn't say that.
No, I know. But when I talked about the difference between when the line starts to get blurry between magic and superpowers, that's what I meant. But yeah, you're right. I have been comparing him to Batman for sure. Mm-hmm. He is definitely he is less anonymous, than Batman is, and obviously he actually has powers where Batman does not.
Yeah,
they're both absurdly wealthy,
which is a power in and of itself.
Right. The people of the streets are apt to point out to Wax. Lordship. You want to talk about the rioting parlor?
I would totally go to both of these places. I would absolutely like the utility of being able to just go and force yourself to relax externally is amazing. Maybe it's not healthy to rely on that as a crutch, but I don't care. I want that. Rioting parlors, on the other hand, are just Twitter.
Or Reddit. I mean, either way.
Yeah.
Pick your poison.
My Reddit is just mushrooms and lockpicking. Those are mostly what I look at on my subreddits. I don't venture into the things that will make me upset.
That's fair. I definitely understand. The idea of avoiding those things, for me, at this point, we don't see the soothing parlor. Definitely get bringing it up here. It makes sense to talk about it because it's like this entire concept of like, oh, I could go somewhere and have my emotions manipulated. It's like those things kind of exist in the real world in different facets. Like there are some real world analogs that Sanderson's clearly kind of drawing upon here inside of this fantasy setting. But the way that you phrase the idea of a soothing parlor being somewhere that you could go to like have your emotions forced out of you to some degree. Mm-hmm. It's therapy, man. It's just therapy.
It is, but that's work.
Yeah, that's what solves the problem, which is also what you said, is that it's like forcing them out of you isn't healthy. So like you addressed the problem before we got there, but I definitely have to giggle at that a little bit. Mm-hmm. Oh man. And then the Pathian sanctuary, like this idea of it just being like an old style terrace hut with like a chair in it that you like just go and talk to God.
Talk to God, poop a little bit.
It's a bunch of little pooping rooms everywhere. Oh no. The Pathians are going to be so upset at us.
Okay. So let's take this to the extreme that we know it would come to if it followed the same sort of path that like modern religions do. And sure. What does a Pathian super church look like?
Well, they do have churches. We do kind of know this because he does say that there are churches. But what does a Pathian super church look like? So it would have to disentangle itself from harmony pretty far, which is an unrealistic, right? Mm. So I'm just trying to work through the variables. What does disentangling itself from harmony but promoting harmony look like?
No, promoting yourself while pretending to promote harmony.
Sure. The only thing that came to mind was like selling stuff that balances your pH, like your internal pH.
Oh no.
We've got stuff for basic people. We've got stuff for acidic people.
Oh fuck.
Like, I'm just imagining like selling certain waters and like Alka-Seltzer tablets. Like apple cider vinegar. You're like, yeah, you're gonna drink 3 of these, like like a bad doctor's office.
It's like selling low. It's like
the pH balance is too much benefit.
Alkaline water with lemon juice.
Yeah, right. Oh. I remember reading that on some food blog somewhere, and I'm like, that's not. You're counteracting the entire purpose here,
which is kind of bullshit anyway.
I mean, there are things to be said about pH balance for your gut biome, but
sure, but
your gut biome is connected to.
There are ways to do that better than just buying alkaline water.
Oh yeah. Alkaline water is probably the least effective. I mean, it's helpful, but it's probably it's kind of like putting on a Band-Aid when you've got an amputation. Like the Band-Aid's that's not enough. It's not the right solution. It's not the right tool. Yeah. It is the right tool. Accidentally picking something up and bringing it to your mouth with your wrong hand and suffering pain while ingesting alcohol. Neat. Switching that over to the left side of the table. Fuck you and you double-handed bullshit. Okay. Next up, we find Wax running into a member of the Set family, not to be confused with the Set organization, of course. However, this Set runs a taxi business, that being a member of the family, for the record. And this week, in general, with a C, yes.
Yes.
In general, does a great job of showing us how allomancy becomes incorporated into the economy and the legal system itself. In this case, a coin-shot scout who goes and looks for the busiest parts of town to send out the carts to, and an illegal rioter to drum up business in different locations. Wax, however, is looking specifically for driver 16, who has popped himself into a soothing parlor after a brief interrogation that yields us that information.
This dude, Mr. Set, whatever his first name is, excuse me, but wheeling and dealing just like his grandpappy used to do. Because wheat and cars and wheelchairs and shrewd business sense. Do you get it?
I truly had not connected the wheelchair to the carriages, actually. Good work. I didn't even cross my mind. Didn't think about it.
Well, I'm glad my shitty joke also just went over your head.
I mean, kind of. It's interesting because it's a good joke. The shitty joke did not go completely over my head. Wheeling and dealing, like I figured you were talking about, like the fact that they both have wheels and that they both make deals. So like shitty joke, good, but the extra textual nature of it also being like, oh yes, they both have wheeling businesses, and therefore my brain also says the wheelchair was an invention during Set's time. Because of that invention, did his family like take it and run with it and develop it into carriages, which previously weren't necessary because of canal boats? Like, is there some sort of like ultra, like that could be a way of them maintaining wealth? It's a loose thing, but like that's where my brain went more, if that makes sense.
I didn't get the
I'm not suggesting that the text necessarily suggests that, but
yeah, I didn't get the idea that Set invented the wheelchair.
I also don't think that he invented the wheelchair, but I think that he is definitely the kind of person who would take it and profit off of it.
That's fair. That's true. I'm surprised by the less than elevated level of this guy's like status, considering Alrian's position. It's mentioned that she's no longer Set after their marriage, right?
I don't think so. I would assume she's Eladrian.
She'd be
based
Eladrian.
on Sanderson's views and everything else inside of the text.
Right. I didn't get the idea that she had siblings, but maybe that
she has a brother. She has a brother. Yeah.
Oh, I don't remember that.
He really only comes up in the second book, and then he Njorden. You remember how we had a really tough time saying his fucking name?
No,
I do. Jnorindin. I'll throw in the chat.
It's fine. But I mean, Either way, he and Wax are at least fairly closely related.
Cousins, distant. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it is 300 years, huh?
It is, but I mean, distant cousins still. Like, they could date, but...
As they should.
As they should, yes. It's the only solution.
It's in the contract.
Yeah, yep. It's in the Historica.
No, I mean, he and Steris's contract.
Oh, yes. Right. Must date cousin.
Yep. But I did appreciate seeing just to get back to the actual text a little bit, the usage of allomancy in different industries and how they can be sort of applied in a way that's not strictly combative or offensive, like we've been mostly seeing.
Yeah, the economic implications of a lot of these things, and also the idea that they have to be regulated with like the Allomantic Agreement of 94, or what was it, is like another like little great note that I really appreciated, because it gives you this idea of like, this is really a society that is incorporated into it, Allomancy and Feruchemy, which we get even more of later from Marisy's perspective that I really appreciate too.
Right. Yep, for sure.
So we move from Wax over to Marisy, who is back in the constabulary chatting with Milan. The pair have a discussion surrounding the egalitarian nature of the constabulary because of the role that Vin plays as a model for women inside of Elendel society. Of course, Milan still finds that humans tend to be sexist despite their best intentions, and points to the fact that Kandra have very different perspectives on gender to begin with. That also brings us to their differing perspectives on religion, and Milan definitely finds it odd that someone would worship the guy who died versus the one who saved the world. What do you think about these conversations?
I can't help but compare this conversation directly to one that Vin had with, I can't remember if it was Tensoon or Arsur at that point, where she's talking about, I think it must have been Tensoon at this point, but still pretending to be Arsur.
I'm pretty sure it was, yeah.
I think. Where it seemed like there was a pretty solid, defined gender to the Kandra. It was just difficult for humans to interpret it because they could take male or female forms, regardless of what they were themselves. Whereas this seems much more, the form that they take defines their gender. Like it seems like it flips which one comes first in the definition.
I think it just allows them to choose, right? Like that's kind of the idea, is that they're more gender bendy than assumed, right? And I think that some of that also comes from something that we can talk about from Era 1, where it's like each generation is more radical than the last, right? And so there are evolving views on what a body even is to begin with, right? Where you've got the guy with the tree body, and then you've got everyone else. She is a seventh,
yeah.
Yeah, right. So you've got these evolving ideals and ideas within an immortal species, which, to be frank, I feel like is pretty rare for most immortal species inside of a lot of fiction, because generally, who's going to be the most locked in for all time? Like the immortals. It's something that Tolkien set up with the elves. They're the least progressive of races because they believe themselves to be completely pure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's just, I guess it is technically a matter of perspective from each of them between Tensoon and Arsur and Milan. But it's spoken with such conviction.
Yeah, right.
And definitiveness.
It definitely is. And it is something, and maybe that's just the conviction with which she believes it too. That could be the other part of this to consider, is, and especially considering the way that we know Milan from before, she was very convicted in a lot of those beliefs, like a kind of at the time, like an angsty teenager. But now, you know, I think she's equated herself to a 20 something at this point, like a late 20 something.
Yeah.
In terms of emotional age. So I do want to talk for a little bit about the religious aspect that they brought up as well, beyond just the gender aspect. And this idea that Milan finds it very weird that anyone worships Kelsier to begin with, the guy who died, versus the literal god that survived.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
There is a nuance there that she's missing. And I think in a way, Sazed he left this mortal world too. So however you want to define death, so did he. Kelsier also to advocate for that belief system, none of this happens without his martyrdom. And the pieces could have still been in place to continue and to progress, but you wouldn't get everybody rallying behind the crew in the same way without Kelsier putting it all forward and dying for the cause.
That's true. That there is something to that there, which I think is the foundation of the belief, right? I do want to bring up something that's textual. I left it out because I wanted to see if it was something you pulled in, but I know that I'm going to get screamed at if I don't bring it up. So in the text here, while they're debating this, I'm just reading this verbatim from Marcy. Harmony is not my god. I'm a survivorist. Oh yeah, Milan said, because that makes sense. Worship the guy who died rather than the one who saved the world. The survivor transcended death, Marcy said, looking back on the hand of the door, but not entering. He survived even being killed, adopting the mantle of the Ascendant during the time between Preservation's death and Vin's ascension. Rust, was she arguing theology with a demigod? Milan, however, just cocked her head. What? Really?
Yeah, I don't remember that happening.
Kind of sounds like some added stuff, but she does clarify at the very least that yes, Harmony wrote of it himself in the words of founding Milan. And Milan goes off to say like, well, I didn't fucking read that shit. Like I was there.
Interesting. I mean, that plays into a still unanswered question of that conversation between Sazed as Harmony at that point and Spook about becoming like bestowing the gift of Mistborn upon him as a gift from Kelsier, and whether or not that was just what he believed Kelsier would have wanted, or if it was actually an extraplanar conversation of some sort. I think it's interpretation of the wishes of Kelsier, but that's not technically clarified. I don't think.
No, we don't really have a clarification on that at all, which is why this also adds a little bit of that. And I think that's what makes it interesting, too, is that it adds a little bit of context to that kind of side of things. Not context, but a little bit of, better to call it, like it convolutes it a little bit, right? It brings in a little bit of like, was it as clear cut as I thought it was? Could this religion already be going down the path of megachurches where like the myth is starting to spread beyond the point? Are these the original words of founding that we're reading, or are they translated? Like, so yeah, that's,
yeah.
I think I would get skewered if I didn't bring that up. So I had to. I just wanted to see if you would bring it up for question's sake. But there's another note here as a conversation between Marcy and Micklin breaks out, and we feel more of that resentment that the officers have towards Marcy here. Milan confronts Marcy about this, but she gets frustrated about her position inside of the constabulary despite working on it. She even voices to Milan that Wax is a part of the problem and a part of the reason that she's in this situation to begin with. Milan and Marcy end up having a conversation about human nature, wrapping this all up, as Marcy is pretty sure that she's more in tune with human emotions than Milan is herself.
I mean, this basically loops back to the previous conversation and sort of the, am I really arguing with a demigod about philosophy kind of, or about theology? And there's a little bit of, is it a lack of respect for the religious history between these faceless immortals and humanity? Or is it just the fact that things aren't exactly as they're written and these people know it? Like we saw the sort of augmentation of survivorism through the first trilogy. Even like in the decade after Kelsier's death. It happens quickly, and it can only spiral more in 300 years.
Yeah. 3 centuries of time is, I mean, this is a third of the time of the Lord Ruler.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. And
it's a significant amount of time for things to change.
People still haven't been perfect.
No.
And they should.
Not even close.
But Harmony's fucking it all up, coddling them too much.
Do you think it's Harmony's fault for coddling?
Harmony thinks it's Harmony's fault for coddling.
Fair point. He does think it's his fault. But do you agree with him, I guess, is maybe the question.
Not necessarily, but he has a direct example, apparently. Whether or not that's on this world or a different world that he's able to observe, that he's not interacting with. He can see what he's doing and what they're doing, or what he's doing and what he's not doing, and the difference in outcomes. But people are fickle, so they're always going to find a way to ruin themselves. I remember where I was going with this.
No, I think that that's a good spot to end it on, in all honesty, talking about the Khandra and sort of the nature of things, right? Which is kind of what you were getting to.
What I do think is interesting is Milan's knee-jerk reaction to come to Maricy's defense in this scenario at the constabulary. And
okay.
I don't know why. I can't understand what her motivation would be to run to Maricy's defense. Still trying to figure that out. I mean, is it just that she was young and underregarded? Not underappreciated, but underestimated in the time
of who running in to defend?
Milan,
defending Maricy,
wanting to defend Maricy from the other constables that are sneering at her.
I think she's just seeing it as unfair treatment more than anything else. I don't think that there's any sort of, like you said, underregarded is one thing for sure, but I don't know that there is anything so specific that we can lean on. Wow. Good work. PJ finished his cocktail, everybody. We haven't even finished the first chapter. Okay. But really that said, yeah. What's up?
Tasty.
Nice. I mean, you just drank the whole thing. You just finished. But yeah, I do think that a lot of this is on just Milan's understanding of equality and being kind of removed from the picture. I mean, she even says that, as a Khandra, she doesn't spend a whole lot of time occupying other bodies or trying to blend in. She's probably often with people that she likes and associates with that are regular people that know her as her, or Khandra, either way. Mm-hmm. And she finds the shit unfair. And so she just reacts very open and honestly because, she's kind of just an immortal, normal person to some degree. I mean, not entirely, of course, but it's kind of the way she spins herself a little bit.
That's a fair assessment, especially with her interactions with Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
That comes across.
Yeah. Because she still has a bunch of naivete. It's not as though she is, and this really comes across when we get to Aradel and the way that she's whoa, hoity-toity, and thou and thou'st, and all the formal bullshit that she keeps spouting. She's just a person kind of at heart, not a human person, but she's just a person. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really great because I think that immortal characters can so often be some of the least interesting pieces of shit that are just statues, the ultimate version of Stoic-esque, where they're there's nothing better than what I believe, and what I believe is the only way. Very much like the Khandra, the second generation Khandra were in the first series.
I feel like a great sort of other take on that, and they're not technically immortal, but kind of close in comparison.
They're immortal. They aren't invulnerable.
Right. No, but sort of a comparison to make
your counter
would be vampires and What We Do in the Shadows, and sort of their interactions with the modern world as ancient beings.
Yeah, they're more disconnected versus you have the new, energy vampire that's very fresh and new and feels more like a person, even if he's, a bloodsucker in his own right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You've watched the TV show, right? I'm not.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, just making sure. I talked to someone the other day. I
haven't watched season 4 yet, but
I haven't either. So, but I talked to someone the other day who had seen the movie and loved the movie, but hadn't seen the show, and I was like, "You're missing out on one of the best parts that they didn't even think of yet." So it's so good. So we end this chapter with a note on what happened to the body and how Bleeder had previously escaped a grave of an executed individual. And the proof has begun to come to the surface. We're starting to get more and more kind of evidence that Bleeder's been a lot of places.
Yeah, this is a strange, unsettling sort of little bit of information to come across. And I can't help but think I keep going back and forth on this. Would it have been stronger to come across this before our understanding of Bleeder and like hear about this like desecrated grave first? Or would that have just confused things?
I think that it would have been better to hear about this first. I think that the general, a light complaint that I have about this book is that it is a mystery novel that doesn't really write itself like a mystery novel. You know what I mean? Like we aren't necessarily able to string a lot of these pieces together on our own. And so instead we are given these bits of information to string together a different puzzle versus like in Agatha Christie, you'll see like all the pieces will be there. You just don't see how they assemble until someone pulls the string taut and everything's very clear.
Like what if instead of this reveal, it was the disrespect of learning about the desecrated grave of Bloody Tan?
Yeah, right.
Something like that.
Any other number of options. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think that there are a lot of different ways that this could be done. Yeah. But yeah, I think that is probably ultimately my biggest gripe with the entire book, but it's a small gripe, truth be told. So it gives the feeling, and it's a cool reveal. It's a cool story, but I think it could have notched up the sort of mystery aspects of it a little bit. Right. It could have provided some suspense to like have, a desecrated grave enter the picture and be like, well, what's that doing? Like why that before we have the Conjurer reintroduced, Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
But he's also, I mean, it's worth pointing out too, Sanderson in this series is very good about maintaining the pace, and these books go really quick. Like this is snappy as hell. No waste.
That's true.
Sometimes you want more, but
I mean, I talked to you today while I was driving my dogs to the groomer, and you're like, yeah, I was just listening to the book and then it was done. I'm like, all right, that was like an hour and a half. It felt so fast.
This week in particular, felt very fast. Yeah.
And I don't think the page count is different.
No, it's about the same.
Yeah. It's dense. It's dense.
Yeah. Week to week, I should say, it's about the same page count.
Yeah, but like, there's something strange about the fact that like it's dense, but it's not weighted down by that density.
Mm-hmm.
Like well paced. It's very, very well paced. There's always something
briskly
happening.
Paced. Yeah. Right. That's why, despite doubling our page totals, which is really kind of just accelerating our word count a little bit by like 20%. If we look at chapter over chapter between the books that we've read before, it is sometimes really hard to try to do these chapters concisely because literally so much happens in every chapter that it makes it tough to give it the treatment, because simultaneously it feels like so much happens that we can't not cover it. And so little pages have gone by that like we would be going so fucking slow through this book if we did it any differently.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. All right. With that, we get into chapter 15. We're back with Wax looking for the man Chappelle, and we're back in full noir detective mode. I'm going to try to veer away from using Batman here, but at the very least, I want to say this is where we switch from maybe Keaton Batman to Pattinson Batman, where we do kind of feel like we enter into the Batman mode. And it really feels like a noir film for most of the rest of this from Wax's perspective for a while. You get kind of, I don't know about but like with the mists, it kind of feels like it's a dark and stormy night, and you can see the moon overhead, and like the sun glare is standing on the pylon, and all these other small details just lend itself to a very noir-esque look. Wax reaches the soothing parlor and notices the feelings immediately that are being pressed upon him, regretting not bringing his aluminum-lined hat to reflect these things. He makes his way up to the man and administers a real quick Vought-Kampf test to make sure he isn't a conjurer, and is kind of broken emotionally in that moment. We figure out that Chapeau is a very broken man. For those of you who don't know, the Vought-Kampf niche joke is it's the Blade Runner test to make sure you're not a replicant. Okay, cool. Fuck. It's so bad when you don't laugh at my joke because I'm like, is anyone else gonna get the reference? All right. Well, fuck.
I mean, it's dense set of stuff you're talking about.
Yeah, it's fair.
Yeah.
It's fair. He sought this place to get rid of his feelings, to break down his memories, but that's not something that they can do here, of course. But this entire chapter ends on kind of an eerie note. He says, not this chapter, this little section, this little triple dot. He says that he saw himself.
Yep. Regarding the trying to forget everything through soothing, he just needs to learn the rules of allomancy or something like that.
Read the words of founding. They're probably there.
Probably. It'd be so twisted and so fucked to see an altered version of yourself after it sees you and it morphs, and God, that's so unsettling. It's so fucking gross. I have to wonder if this guy's named because the French word for hat is chapeau. It's spelled differently, but
interesting.
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah. I'll tell you what. This series, not the most clever names in the world. This era, Sanderson's kind of going for on the nose on a lot of things. That's a great question. I genuinely don't know. Maybe hat's a cover up, hat's a personality. Ooh, if we look into that a little bit more from Wayne's perspective, could this be a misleading note instead of the chapter? I don't know. Find out more next week. But yeah, absolutely. This is a very disturbing moment. And I really enjoy the way in particular that this section is written, this chapter is written, because it does do a really great job of almost giving you like a TV episode style stinger moment where it's like a stinger and then a cut to commercial break where you go and you switch to the B plot, and then you'll come back to the A plot.
Totally does.
Yeah. That's also how this week ends, is in a cliffhanger stinger.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed this moment and this call out. So, and then you're like, well, fuck, I just started this chapter. I got to read through the end of it. But we move over to Marcy, of whom meets Aradel on a roof overlooking the city. He sends out a couple of likely mercenary coin shots out into the night before discussing with, you can see the fucking voice to text error here, Aradel, the cause of the assassin, and the fact that it is one of the Khandra of whom is doing it and taking part in this. He seeks proof, of course, to confirm that it is one of these faceless immortals that he's heard so much about but knows nothing of, and gets it in the form of Milan transforming before his very eyes and explaining Palm's lost soul. This is a moment that is played straight until suddenly it's kind of a joke about snoring. It's a very serious moment with almost seemingly, I can imagine the bat signal in the sky. I don't know. This seems like a very Commissioner Gordon moment.
How dare you?
Okay.
She is dead serious about the snoring and is absolutely being a cryptic, immortal being. No, it was a great comedic moment. Mm-hmm. And I think it really does a good job of highlighting how people are going to look for deep meaning in things, especially when they expect there to be meaning somewhere. They'll just attribute whatever meaningless thing as something very profound. And you see that everywhere. You see that in things that aren't even supposed to be meaningful. Mm-hmm. So we do it. I do it, at least.
Sure, we literally look for meaning in everything. Yeah. I do appreciate the commentary on it, right? I do really appreciate that portion of this. And I do think that it's important that this isn't entirely played straight, but it is, like we were kind of commenting on earlier, it is very funny that Milan presents herself in this way, outwardly as though she has to be perfect image of the faceless immortals. And it's not only is it a funny moment that it breaks down around the snoring, but it's a funny idea given the woman that we know to be Milan, and just the presentation of herself showing up and being like, "Thou'st," all of that shit is just so good.
Just using the term human for whatever reason.
Human
is simultaneously pious and derogatory somehow.
That's a great way of putting it. It is very, pious and derogatory. That is specifically correct. Nothing else to say. No notes on that. No notes. After taking in the information, Ardell and Marcy share one more note of conversation, that around spying on Wax to make sure that he stays in line, as he is the closest thing to a rogue element in all of this. She agrees, but says that she cannot lie to Wax and will have to tell him that she is doing so. He thinks this is fine. Of course, both Marcy and Milan take off from the constabulary to the governor's mansion.
So this almost set up a really cool, like, not quite double agent, but sort of
a spy, just in general,
spy, but like a
where did the allegiances lie? Kind of a question.
Not, I mean that a little bit, but dramatic irony sort of scenario between Wax and Marcy, and like him sharing things with her, being a confidant, and us understanding that most of that's going to go back to the constabulary. Like it almost set up this really weird, not stressful. There's a very common word that I'm looking for that I think starts with an S. The dynamic is, God damn it. I'm going to think of it. It's a stupidly like common term.
Okay.
But I don't know. It was almost a very fun dynamic that we were going to get into. And it just completely negated itself. And it's a great compromise to say, and it makes sense for Marcy's character to say, yes, I'll spy on him, but I'm going to tell him I'm doing it. Like, I'll report on what he's doing, but I'm going to tell him that that's what's happening. Like that's not fun. But it is what she would do. You know? Do you get where I'm coming from?
Yeah, no, I definitely know where you're going with, or where you're moving towards, right? And I think that it's really, I agree with you, and I definitely understand exactly what you're getting at. It's also very tropey in its own right? Like it's very tropey to have kind of the double agent in this moment. And so I appreciate that from Marcy's perspective, from a character perspective, she has to be honest, and she demands that level of honesty, A, because I don't think she's capable of lying. I don't think she's capable of holding up that front. And then B, because her morals won't let her. Like, she morally has to be honest, because she doesn't necessarily believe this fully herself, but she does, at least to us in the story, kind of represent the best version of the law.
Yeah, I do wonder if this will force her to adopt more of Wax's interpretation of the law, or the best version of the law.
I think it already does within this week. I think we get that later when she's in the mansion. You know what I mean? Like we'll get to that in a second. But I think that yes, your prediction is ultimately correct on that, or your foresight into thinking about the character and theme.
But that's before this even happens. Like that's before this comes into play. I mean, this is straight up an assignment to spend time with and work with Wax, as opposed to just her doing it on her own time. This is going to be her doing it on the constabulary's time. So is that going to influence her policing sort of methods?
Got it. Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
And
I understand.
Does that evolution change what she actually reports?
And it very well may. We do have to see that yet to see what actually makes its way back to Aradel, or Arabelle, if you're my voice to text for notes. Arabelle land. That, and I mentioned this to you offline, but like Aradel were the two things that fought me all the time going through notes. And it's not that innate is a hard word. Ardell, okay, I get it, but it was annoying and it was constant. But innate specifically was the most annoying, because it would shift the grammar around the word, because it assumed that I was saying everything and doing everything wrong when it's a proper fucking noun in this case. So, God damn it. Yeah. But I do appreciate kind of the take on the trope, and kind of it's not an inversing or a reversing, but a pushing against, right? Because it is what her character naturally would do. But we have to see how that pays off. Like, to what degree does her honesty, where does she lie at the end of all this?
Right.
So we come back to Chapeau, and he recounts a truly horrifying story about this trickster with a false face. He gives all of the gory details, and again, this feels like it was almost lifted from Seven, the way Chapeau really dives into the details here. Wax extracts the information he needs from the man and gives him some money to get a hotel to sleep in. Wax has his heading, and he's headed for Lestib Square, and he's sure that he's potentially being set up to be Bleeder's prey.
I had not internally made the connection between like this scene and Seven, but I'm almost positive it's exactly what I was thinking of. Like, that makes so much goddamn sense. And specifically, if you've seen Seven, the sort of interview with the lust guy.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Like it is exactly this scene in feeling, not in context, but
right.
Because it's tough to write that exactly
it's
the same.
It's tough to try to rewrite that scene. Yeah. Even. Good luck. Yeah.
It's a little fucked.
It's a little fucked. Recommend Seven to everyone over the age of 18, but if you can't handle gore, do not watch it.
There's not a ton of gore.
No. Here's what I'll say. I'll correct. Read the MPAA readings, and if any of that sounds like a bad time to you, do not watch, because it is the worst version of that rating.
Yeah. There's the implication of gore all the time.
Yeah. Right.
They do a really good job of making it unsettling while also not actually being that gory. There's a couple scenes.
It's almost never the fixation of the frame to actually put the gore in the frame. However, you are still surrounded by it, and so you get the feeling of it despite.
It's weird how
still one of my favorite movies of all time.
I love it. I love Seven.
David Fincher rules.
Yeah, he's so good. I'm curious about the name Lester Bornes and how it's perpetuated itself, especially considering Spook lived on and didn't like that name. And that name was born out of trauma. And he established Eastern street slang as sort of the high imperial language. So like anybody who understands what that name means, which was I am abandoned, right?
Lefting unborn, I am abandoned. Yeah.
I find it weird that he would perpetuate that name for himself, unless it's just tradition to keep the name that he lived in. But he liked the name Spook, especially considering Kelsier gave it to him because of what the name Lester Bornes meant.
Yeah.
I don't know.
For the record, I agree with you by and large. I think that there is definitely something there that is, it's odd. I wouldn't say it's completely out of place, though, because it is Lestib Square, which to me, almost immediately as I think about the word, cuts it into, if we're thinking about the translation of Lestib Bornes, my brain understanding Spanish, which isn't the direct parallel here at all, but I would say lefting I'm born is that translation. To me, that almost reads like it's lefting square, maybe.
Which is the abandoned
left
part.
Square? What's up?
That's the abandoned part.
No. Well, yeah. Maybe. No, you're right.
No.
That's worse, actually. When I wrote it out, my brain said lefting square. Absolutely. So it's the left square. That's not what that means, especially as it's translated throughout. No, you're right. Good call. Yeah. God, I would at the very least pose the argument or pose the idea that it's like it's history that you can't get rid of necessarily, especially as you are, the Lord Mistborn, a sacred figure, and your humble beginnings. If we think about superheroes, right, like origin stories are really important, and I think that in history, origin stories are often revered, despite their tendency to be very, very, very dismal in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's fair. The other thing, I think it was from last week, and we never brought it up, but the term spook was used to refer to a Fed, essentially. And it feels weird that they would use that term and not be talking about our boy.
That's interesting. I missed that, but it naturally makes sense because spook was the king spook in that way, right? Like he was the top fed.
Well, I mean, sure, but they were using it like modern use of the word spook when talking about like federal agents.
I know. I'm just connecting those two dots a little bit closer because I think that like it's not just a slang translation. It is a convenient as hell slang translation because spook is the head of a government, and so then in turn that's slang. And obviously, this is devoid of the other side of that slang, which is the racial slang, which is very native to Earth, and that's not touched upon, of course. And obviously, we aren't throwing that around or anything like that. But I do think that it is interesting that there is a direct parallel between the government slangs, and I don't feel like it's unreasonable, actually. He probably got a note on it, and this is probably exactly what he said to like be like, no, it's fine. Leave me alone. I don't want to change that word.
That could be.
I would believe that full-heartedly. Okay, before we go on to the next chapter, I do want to ask any notes that you had on the broadsheet itself inside of this section.
I mean, yes. So there's the Visitors from Other Worlds one, which is front and center to this page. I mean, it's also the most relevant to the story at large, I feel like. It's sitting by a pool. Like, it's so exactly the description of Hoyd in the epilogue, man.
Of Elantris?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's exactly that.
And it's showing up in the equivalent of a garbage rag.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Is I want to disregard it because of that, but what it's actually doing is making me want to believe the actual garbage in real world. Because, hey, maybe this is true too.
Sanderson planted his own UFO sighted inside of the newspaper. That's pretty much what it is.
No,
I mean, like,
it's exactly what it is. But
just need to get you an "I Want to Believe" poster on your back wall.
There's not that much in this one that's like based on our understanding of the world at large and actual like things that are going on contemporarily in this story. There's not much like unbelievable stuff in this broadsheet comparatively, right?
Yeah, versus the other one, for sure. I do want to bring up. I love bringing that up. I definitely wanted you to bring that up because it was like it's right there. It's so good.
Some weird dude crouching by a pool.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, man.
Isn't it a female?
I don't remember.
Shit, I'm reading it right now. Just a shadow really piercing eyes, face like otherworldly hideous, and visage struck right in my heart. Light preservation instinct. Oh no, never mind. I don't think there's any gender ascribed. Yeah, doesn't look like it. The part of this that strikes me beyond that section is kind of like
just
the horror.
A shadow, really, she said.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. That's what I was saying.
Narrating about the figure. Okay.
Right. And so we have this picture of like a masked individual on top, and that's what kind of makes it, spooky, scary. But I love at the very not yet. Wrong, different spook. How dare you? The thing that I love is a hero for all ages musical thing at the very bottom there. It's like,
so
of
good.
course, someone would turn the story of Vin and Ellen into a fucking musical.
I'd do it.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely would. It's also interesting to see, like, it's the people pulling on Ellen's side and it's the Inquisitors pulling on Vin's. It's just like, it's a lot. I love it, but it's just very fun. And then we also get some details about, like, one of the things that I really appreciate about the broadsheets. I know that I kind of talked down about them at the very beginning, but I actually prefer these. I think I even said 10 to none over the logbooks, because it's a little bit more disconnected, right? Like, one of the fun things to pull out of this is that we have a city name that we've heard maybe mentioned a couple of times, but New Saren is brought up, and we figure out that, like, the style is different. And we also, from the political cartoon, see this, like, the smacking of New Saren's butt with a paddle, which is Elendil smacking New Saren, and we can assume that that's like taxes or something else on the city's behalf. and like onlookers looking on. Like there's a lot of like fun little context here that's all left up to our interpretation.
And it's Elendil as a lion and Nucerin as a human baby. Yeah. So like I don't know what to make of that. Like it's outside looking in on political cartoons is really weird and cool, but weird, and I don't know what to make of it.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to read.
Hard to understand.
And by that I mean it's like hard to
interpret.
Come with a take. Yes, exactly what I was going for. Yeah, that's it. You also get like a little tiny glint of story that is, again, the Allomancer Jack in the pits of Atlantia is kind of sprinkled throughout these in like little tiny little bits. It's not the full thing. You never get the full thing. So we'll have to read the short story at some point. But
I was trying to read along the margin of the one on the right and just can't.
I realized that you and I actually don't have the same copy of the book for the first time ever. You have the paperback.
I do.
And I have the hardbacks. And so the hardback is just one page. Is yours split over two?
No. One page.
Oh, okay. It's just one page. So it's just really small.
Yeah, it's really tiny.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense.
It's really teeny tiny.
Okay. I would have pulled it up for you and then screenshotted it from my Kindle. Oops.
Glad I have glasses.
Glad you can see. Yes, this is great. Okay, with that, we go into chapter 16. We move back to Wax, of whom has reloaded for his journey, is preparing for his next move. As he stands atop an electricity pylon in the middle of the night, Bleeder's voice invades his mind. And this is a crazy scene that is very reminiscent of Ruin from the first series to me, but there's something distinctly more intimate and sinister to her than any Khandra we've experienced before either. Obviously, she's not this foul power that we're comparing her to in the godly aspect, but there is something unique and different to Bleeder here. The way she mentions his friend, obviously referring to Wayne, and all of the other small things, puts her in the background and really makes her feel diabolical. It makes her kind of feel like she was in Alloy of Law. You know what I mean? Like it makes, I don't know if you get that conspiracy brain, but like.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, it makes me feel like there's something beyond just being a character on the outside looking in.
Yeah, oh, yes.
Like,
yes.
This is based on that sort of idea. She would have had to have been present through his entire journey as a roughsman based on this. Like, so she explains it away as having done research as kind of a Khandra thing, as she says. And it's just so much more intense than that.
Mm-hmm.
It's, and there's a whole diatribe on germ theory, essentially. And like that goes unaddressed by Wax for whatever reason, but like,
germ and bacteria, like infections. But yeah.
I mean, that's what it is. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. There's a lot. Is that all germ theory? Is like blood isn't germ theory, is it?
Talking
because they're talking about like white blood cells.
Germ theory is not so much talking about white blood cells. Yeah, you're right.
Sure. That was the picture I got from it, I should say. That's not necessarily explicitly
more talking about,
but
yeah, infection and neurobiology.
Got it. Yeah.
And that it's a great metaphor. But it's only a great metaphor if you understand what she's talking about. And True. Wax probably doesn't fucking understand what she's talking about. Because that's not, as far as I understand, like not a thing in there.
It's not in his domain regardless, but it also is definitely her stepping outside of his comprehension. It does feel perhaps within the realm of Khandra comprehension, though. You know what I mean?
Maybe.
Like it feels like consuming bodies and everything else like that might be something that
that's
you kind of have a read on. So,
because they're all
for
individual like organisms, technically.
Yeah, that was my thought.
That's a really good point. I hadn't considered that.
As we get further in this series, I have fewer and fewer answers for the record. So, yeah, just letting you know.
There's some other strange comments though. Like she's talking to someone else while talking to Wax.
Yeah, there is that moment.
Does that happen out loud or in his head?
In his head.
That's in his head.
Yep.
And, well, we don't have any understanding of somebody that has the ability to speak to someone's head directly, but also speak out loud. It's so weird. Because you would think that would just be a straight up telepathic thing. and not have anything to do with speaking out loud to somebody else at the same time. But maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know what to make of this. There's some really fucky stuff going on. And I don't think it has anything to do with having the power of hemalurgy coursing within her. Like there's something very wrong happening here. There's something very evil happening here. Somehow.
So you're past this being something that's explainable within the three.
I didn't think it was
arts
explainable last time.
No, I know. But I'm just saying that in general, that's where you stand on it.
In general, like, I don't think it makes sense that this person is able to speak telepathically in general. And that paired with all of the extra information that she has on Wax. It is a she, right?
Yeah. Palm. Yep. She's referred to as a she several times by Milan. Yep.
So that's also an interesting counterpoint to the one before that Milan made, because she was acting as Bloody Tan, who is a male character.
Sure.
But she's been consistently referred to as she throughout. And that seems contradictory to Milan's stance that gender is attributed to the form that they decide to take any given moment.
So extracting that a little bit, I don't think that it's that. I don't think that it's like the body that they're inhabiting necessarily, although the body that they're inhabiting does kind of determine the perceived gender, right?
Right.
But the idea therein is that they kind of pick their own gender, period, because like they can do whatever they want, like they can literally form whatever organs and whatever body parts, and they can make, and they can develop their complex bone systems and whatever else. So they're amorphous in a massive way. So it feels more like a personal choice.
That's fair. I can get behind that. Anyway,
what it seems like, but yeah,
it does. Yeah, that's fair. Sorry, I derailed myself.
It's all good.
Where was I going with that? Oh, but the fact that she's able to like understand very strangely intimate pieces of information from Wax's past, that he's surprised by her understanding of his life prior to this. And I think if it was well-known information, documented information at all, he wouldn't be surprised anymore because Marisy's got that covered. So this feels special that it's surprising that she knows it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It's more... Yeah, there's a lot of mystery presently around Palm Bleeder. And I think you did a great job as to stretching it further than just this is outside of the hemalurgic arts. This is outside of any understanding that it feels like any character should have for any reason.
Right.
Yeah. Any conceivable reason.
Unless they were one of those little microbiomes.
Oh, are you suggesting that a chondra could shrink really small?
I don't know. How small can they be?
Genuinely a good question. I would assume no smaller than the size of the spikes in them. We do know that mass takes a long time to regrow from the first era, but
true.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that was a great point. Great conversation. Leave that one there and we'll kind of get back to some more Palm stuff, of course, in the future. And whatnot. So he manages, though, to pick up on her location, looking through a set of windows. He sits below the windows and can make out her raspy voice from about 10 feet above as she begins to actually physically talk as opposed to speaking into his mind. And she asks about Lessie and why Harmony never intervened in any of these various moments and why he never intervenes in moments where lives are on the line. She quickly takes off towards the governor with ferrochemical speed after he attempts to engage. But I think that this commentary that Brandon is pointing to is very interesting because it is often the same commentary that's leveled at anyone who believes in an omnipotent, omnipowerful God. Why does suffering exist? Right? Like, why does this sort of perpetual state of suffering in the world exist? Why must it? So,
yeah. I mean, in my opinion, it shouldn't. But to get away from my opinion, those comments stick with him. They fuck him up for the rest of this section. Understandably. And like we start to see this strange parallel between Wax now and Sazed post Tindwell's death in regards to sort of the shaking of their faiths or their grounding belief systems or whatever you want to call it. Whatever Sazed had, because he didn't intrinsically believe in any one faith. Like I wouldn't call him a man of faith, but he was.
I think he's explicitly a man of faith, but not a man devoted to any one faith.
That's a better way to put it. Yeah, exactly that. And Tindwell's death rocked him. Mm-hmm. And now we get sort of retroactively Leslie's death rocking Wax because of this single comment from Bleeder.
Yeah, so the death rocked him to begin with, right? Like it did. We, in the beginning of Alloy of Law, we had 2 chapters basically, which at the end of it each, we had major time skips because it was Wax kind of dealing with the trauma and fallout. Not saying that you aren't acknowledging that, but this resubmerges him in that feeling. It brings him right back into something that it feels like he'd overcome before.
It causes this death to affect his faith.
Yeah, fair point. Yep.
And it's
especially, you're right. Yeah, it directly interrogates the faith more immediately.
That's more what I'm talking about. Exactly.
Yeah. Makes him question being a Pathian. I was going down the road of the sort of the emotional response. You're right, though. In the religious context, it does push him in that direction. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they both make their way to the governor's mansion, Wax chasing after Bleeder through the streets, although she is so fast that he can't really see her or make her out, but he knows where she's headed. Wax, of course, tries to stop her with haze killer rounds and conventional bullets, but fails. She takes out a number of guards when she makes it into the mansion before Wayne pops up among those bodies of the defeated. And he pops out a speed bubble as well, and Wax peppers the area where she's standing. I believe he says something like 24 bullets. He's firing shotgun blasts. He's doing everything from within the speed bubble because he understands that as he shoots out, they're going to go whichever direction his blue shift, red shift happens, and he can't really control it. So by focusing it all in an area, he can adjust for that by literally creating just a field of shrapnel that she has to proceed through.
There's a comment he makes specifically about, what is it? Something over accuracy.
I do remember what you're talking about, which is what I wanted to say that I couldn't remember.
Steris would be proud of him for it.
I'm going to find it, though. Because it is good.
Yeah. While you're looking for that, using the haze killer round was a great idea. And also, ultimately, I expected that to be the thing that would work. And you
wanted to be thorough.
Almost did. Wanted to be thorough. Yep.
You wanted to be thorough. Steris would be proud.
Yep. Yeah. As opposed to thoroughness instead of accuracy.
You didn't want to be precise. Yeah. You wanted to be thorough. It's even written almost in her language, which I really appreciate.
Exactly. Yes.
Yes.
But the haze killer round almost worked. Now that I'm like thinking about it, is it haze killer and not pewter? Wasn't it something about pewter? Was there a round devoted to pewter arms that was like essentially like buckshot?
So I do want to make mention here at the very least. He's using a lot of different rounds. I think in general, they're almost universally referred to as a haze killer round. Not as though that, like, it's the umbrella title for a round meant to kill Allomancers. If that makes sense. Yeah. Because they do talk about specifically
haze killer rounds were the ones that were like ceramic.
They were the ceramic, yes, specifically. Okay. But I think that it's also kind of... at the very least, in the way that I used it in this context, my intent is to use it generically as a...
I was just kind of rolling with it because I misinterpreted it as specifically the ones for pewter arms, which were like super blunt force.
They're also called pewter arm rounds. Yeah, I'm actually using that incorrectly, but my intent when writing the notes and when doing everything was to say, this is a round meant to kill an Allomancer, not talking about the specific round that would kill the specific type of Allomancer.
I think haze killer round was used in the section though.
It was because he does fire specifically a haze killer round. I'm explaining my context was different. I was covering them all with that as an umbrella term.
So because I was just inserting my understanding of what was going on.
Yep.
My assumption is that that first round that hits her in the ankle is the pewter arm round. It's essentially just a fucking hammer of a shotgun shell.
Right.
Coming out of a revolver.
Yeah.
Because this is Vindication.
Yes, this is all Vindication.
And god damn, is that so fucking cool. But I totally expected that to actually work. And I like that there was the little bit of sort of stress but recovery. But a well-placed
there's
shot,
tension there.
There is tension. But I guess it just forces a sort of reapproach at the design phase of this style of round, saying this almost worked.
Right. Which is also something that comes into play later, which is like, this clearly did some damage. Worth pointing out, I was actually correct in calling them Haze Killer rounds. And here's what the text says. Vindication out, spinning the cylinder to one of the gun's special Haze Killer rounds. A thug shot, extra heavy slug, built to deliver as much force as possible. So they are all referred to as Haze Killer rounds. That is something that I think it has been contextualized right now, for the record. And I prefer it because I would rather have kind of a blanket thing than have each round have a... Each round can have a different name and would have a different name conventionally. Those can pop up when necessary, but this is nice because...
I'd like to call it a Haze Killer chamber.
That's just the... Yes, I understand what you're saying. He's firing the Haze Killer chamber, but he's also generically referring to one of 16 different potential bullets as a Haze Killer round. It's designed to kill Allomancers.
He's turning to the Haze Killer chamber and shooting a thug shot.
That would be better, but what I'm saying is...
I know. As
opposed to giving us 16 different types of bullets to try to track and remember.
16 of them, but...
Well, yeah, because you don't need to shoot an aluminum misting with anything but a regular bullet.
Or most of the mistings.
Most of them. Yeah, I know. I guess my point is I like Haze Killer because the connotation of a Haze Killer round is that it is a specialty type of ammunition meant to deal with Allomancers. And that's great because Haze Killers before were people who were specifically trained to use non-metal weapons to deal with Allomancers. So it's the same continuation of language from book to book, which is why I like it. But I think within that, it's important that there's some specificity, which is where I think it's great that we do get, that this is a thug shot and that later, we have a new thing that's coming out from Burnett and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair.
So yeah.
It does perpetuate the sort of idea that Burnett is a vendor in Borderlands. So
it does perpetuate the idea that she is a crafter of some sort in Borderlands, 100%.
The Haze Killer vendor.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I do want a
cool name for a weapons dealer.
It's pretty sick. I mean, Haze Killer in general is just great nomenclature. Love it, especially inside of the context of Mistborn. It's awesome. I do want to mention at the very least, of course, that he tries to get her with the syringe and fails, throwing it outside of the speed bubble. She makes it to innate, but because of Drim's sacrifice and taking what's perceptively like the last bullet in the chamber, the governor remains alive. What'd you think about that little end to that portion?
I mean, there was a lot happening. It went very, very quickly, and it was hard. Being somebody who doesn't do a good job of visualizing things, it was muddy for me to understand like how far away everything was. And like, I know there was like a 10-foot distance between the edge of the bubble and where Bleeder was. And I didn't quite understand how like throwing a syringe at range was going to work. I understood that there was a lot of tension, but I didn't quite grasp what was actually happening.
I think the syringe was a long shot by all intents and purposes. I don't think that the syringe
I didn't think it made sense, but it increased tension. I could understand how like it made the tension go up, but I couldn't get behind it because I didn't think that the actual like mechanics of it made sense.
It felt like a Hail Mary from
how
my
are you
perspective, but it also
how are you going to plunge it?
agreed. Yep. I do want to throw into that mix as well that regardless of being able to plunge it or not, this feels more like a reminder to us that the syringe exists to begin with than it does a
But now it
necessity
doesn't anymore
to
because
the action. Well, he does use it, but he's got one more. But yeah. I totally get it. My no counter argument, really. It feels like a Hail Mary. It adds a little bit of tension, like you're saying, but it does feel like the dumb move here, so to speak, versus figuring out a way to mention the syringe to us any other way.
Right.
Like maybe he checks his pockets on the way in. Like he's double checking to make sure he hasn't broken it or fumbled it in his night flying around. And that's enough of a reminder for us to know that it's there later when he, double checks Drim to make sure that he's legit.
Yeah. I don't know.
Can you imagine if Drim was a Khandra and he just like murdered a random Khandra?
That'd be fucking hilarious.
Come on, dude.
That'd be really fun.
Think a little bit more than that.
But of the last couple books, this was this section that this like question is encompassing was the least visually clear for me. I guess this question and the previous one between like him talking to Bleeder and then being like 10 feet away from her and like speaking audibly after a certain point in the conversation and then like interacting with the speed bubble. It all got very muddy for me.
I think especially in audiobook form, it's not.
Well, it's not even just audiobook form. I know.
I'm just saying, especially in audiobook, it's not particularly
That's
clear.
True. It's true.
Yeah.
But it felt like something that required visual interpretation of what was happening. And I just couldn't get there.
Yeah, I can agree with that. This is a very quick chapter that feels like it should have been a little bit longer in different moments. I do appreciate, I think you made mention of it, the ferrochemical speed and the speed bubble interaction, like just in general, the idea that it puts them on the same plane of speed, basically.
It makes for questions of what other ferrochemical / element interactions exist and how those can negate each other or complement each other or whatever it might be. I'd like to take some time and go through them and like really analyze that. And I'm sure we could find some natural interactions because this feels very natural. I just never thought about it.
Considered it.
It also, what it did make me think about, weirdly, if you had two people that had Wayne's ability to create speed bubbles and you had overlapping speed bubbles, would you have somebody in the sort of Venn diagram center looking at people in the not Venn diagram center moving normally in the same way that somebody in the normal speed bubble looks at somebody outside normally? Like, does it stack?
Right. I understand.
You'd think it'd have to.
I don't think it does, and the reason that I do, I would have to go back and double check. But I think Alloy of Law, there was an assumption that this could be done with chromium bubbles, but they said it would be way too expensive to or bend alloy. Sorry, that the thefts of the train could be happening with a series of bubbles, right? But it would be too expensive to maintain that continuous line, which just makes me believe that it would create a continuous line.
Well, the fact that chromium
is
bubbles
still a question.
Negate.
Bend alloy.
Bend alloy?
Yeah.
Bend alloy and chromium negate each other, which means they interact with each other in a constructive way. Or I guess technically you could call it destructive here. But in that same logic, if you added another bend alloy bubble, it'd be constructive and create a pocket of double or be exponential bend alloy.
That becomes so interesting to think about. It just kind of, I'm also thinking about savantism as it relates. Like, could you, as a bend alloy savant, create a bubble that isn't circled around yourself? Like, let's say you instead put a bubble somewhere else and you move it along. And so you have to predict the path of where someone's going to go, but you're going to give them basically a mobile bubble for as long as your brain can, perpetuate and imagine it. There are a lot of complications that come into this that I love.
There's a lot of complications. I still don't like the fact that this is a metal that somebody is burning and it doesn't follow them around.
It's geographically planted, yes.
That doesn't make sense to me, considering we're in an established universe with a moving planet.
There is an explanation for this. It's not worth running it up the flag right now to double check, but there is like a legitimate conversation that happened around this and a very great explanation. It's outside of text because this isn't a question that you would necessarily answer in text. They have a brief, I think in the last book, they have a brief conversation about it. Not that big of a thing. Why it doesn't move why it moves on the train versus, or not. Why it doesn't move on the train. Exactly. Something like that. Right. So there is something there, but not worth bringing up right now. I'll send it to you. I'll clip it and send it to you. But
I'd like that because it does bother me deeply.
I understand. I get it. So going back to the story here, what do you think of Nate's decision to stay in the city despite the obvious immediate threat to his life and the general instability of Ellendale on the whole?
It feels very the captain goes down with the ship in the moment, but cynically, I can't help but believe that there's motivation externally through the bribery connections that we know exist through later on in this section. And we believe exist earlier, but like we know they exist later. I don't know. It feels noble in the moment, but I can't help but think that there's more to it than that.
It definitely does feel noble in the moment, but it's like lacking sense. And it kind of feels like he's been lacking sense a lot of the time here. But especially considering we know him to not be a noble person in the end, which is what also kind of throws a wrench into it.
Yeah.
Like he's not a good guy, as we find out in a little bit.
So that's another good question. Is he still a good guy?
Corrupt but good?
Cynically, what government official isn't like this?
I mean, there are probably a number that aren't like this, but
I doubt it.
Yeah, I understand where you're going. What'd you say?
I said I doubt it.
I bet there are a number. I can think of at least two off the top of my head that I would put into that camp. We're not going to say names, but I understand. And the cynical side makes sense.
There are several hundred government officials in the U.S.
And I came up with two. There are several thousand.
Yeah.
State government exists, buddy.
It should be stronger.
That said.
Sorry.
That said, I think it's really important to recognize that there is a potential for him to either be kind of feigning some sort of pride and like loyalty to the people, or is he like real about it? And I think that we can really have that conversation fully when we get into the conversation between him and sort of the council at large, as it were, the people that he surrounds himself with. But right now, it's kind of posed to us as a question. So we end the chapter with Wax inspecting the scene, and he finds words scrawled on the wall in blood. I rip out his tongue to stop the lies. I stab out his eyes to hide from his gaze. You will be free.
Super fucked. I want this as a Halloween decoration.
Okay.
B, I could see this being a Death Grips lyrics.
I'll tell you what, I'm a little bummed that this doesn't follow the rule of three properly.
It doesn't.
But it does feel unsatisfying.
They mention that it's unfinished. They feel it's unfinished.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, because it doesn't sound like a good poem.
It's so close to something, but it's just like missing that beat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But doesn't it feel Death Grips like in?
It does feel Death Grips like. I don't disagree at all. It also feels like something that would be found in a bathroom in the middle school of Stranger Things, that they would run into. It would set off a season. It's very King-esque in a big way.
That's fair. Yeah.
So, yeah, I totally agree. I like it. I dig it. I do feel like it's missing a beat, and it does feel kind of Death Gripsy. Feels like a lot of things. So
I a couple days ago started playing Death Grips in the kitchen. Well, I thought Galen was in the... I thought she was in the shower. I thought she was like getting ready for whatever. And I was just rocking out to Death Grips while I was making lunch. And she was definitely on the top of the stairs looking down at me.
Like, what the fuck are you doing?
I'm singing along to Get Got.
Oh, yeah. That'll do it. That'll make you seem like a sane person. What was I going to say? Read Death Grips. Oh, was this before or after the Rings of Power binge-a-thon that we did?
Before. This was like 2 weeks ago or something.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. I was just checking. I was like, if it was the sick day, that would just be extra funny to me. Like, comes out of the bathroom finally, and Death Grips are playing, and she's like, what the fuck is this? Goes back to the bathroom.
I have such a good video of the Death Grips at Riot Fest.
Oh, you mean all black? You could have just filmed the ground with the song playing in the background. Such a good video. Super sweet. Really great.
Jimmy got his battle jacket defaced.
Mm-hmm.
I punched a dude in the face.
Yeah. Did you bust your toe at Death Grips too? What was that?
Maybe.
I don't know that it was. So we move into chapter 15 and we hop over to Wayne's perspective for this quick chapter. And he gives us a little insight on the way that he thinks about class and language, particularly with the crapper. He stumbles out of the bathroom and back to Wax, who sent a late night messenger to Renette for something that we'll get to a little bit later here. It's interesting to me that the kids inside of the story are used here so frequently as messengers and spies. It feels like we're just begging to have a child be murdered and like strung up by his shoes. Yeah. You know, like
that's a consideration for sure. But more directly on this section, there's something unique about Wayne's pseudo intellectual take on things in his commentaries. They're funny and they're fun, and at the same time, they're actually insightful to a certain degree, which is, it feels weird that I'm actually thinking about some of the points that he's making while also actively laughing at the points that he's making. You know?
Mm-hmm.
There's something really special about the way that Wayne is written.
Yeah. He captures a tone that otherwise feels inaccessible in a lot of other authors' hands. There's some, like, it's almost satirical. I don't even know like how exactly to frame it and why I like Wayne as much as I do, because he breaks so many molds for characters, and it feels like he's a cartoon inserted into the middle of a noir drama. And like,
he's a reverse Michael Jordan.
Yes, fair enough. Inside of Space Jam. Yeah, fair point. I was going to go back to the constant on the show at this point, the good old Polinick strippers and comedians answer, which is that like, sometimes you can just believe a character because you need that kind of release valve in the way that they release tension. But there's also something so honest about the way that he approaches a lot of this stuff. I got into a conversation the other day.
Once in a while, a stripper will come out and do a tight five.
Exactly. And then the comedian goes back, and that's exactly what happens in Wayne's. Yeah, no, you're right. That's how all these books work. Clearly, Brandon Sanderson wrote strippers into the story.
Nobody wants the comedians to do a pole routine, though.
Nobody wants the comedian. No. Yeah, they're not built that way. You know what I mean?
The poles aren't built that way.
Also true. That's a completely different issue. No, but I got into a conversation this week with one of our patrons about it, and a friend of the show, of course, about Wayne in particular, and like this conversation about like, is he conventionally intelligent? No, he's not conventional. Or sorry, is he book versus street smarts, right? So he is not. He is totally a child of the streets. He does not have the education or upbringing that a lot of people have, but he is very insightful. He does have some naturally acquired intelligence that's happened through the nature of his life. So I wouldn't call him dumb by any stretch.
I'd say he's more than conventionally intelligent.
I was saying conventional intelligence, which is a little bit...
I mean, like... his intelligence is above that of a standard street smarts kind of character. he bridges gaps that you wouldn't expect to be bridged by somebody just observationally taking.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. This was in a little bit of a different context where someone had posited that he might have a disorder of some kind, and I was more talking down about the disorder angle, if that makes sense. But in the same sort of way. And then we talked about educational differences between, why does Steris and Wayne kind of pick on each other? Why does Wayne specifically target Steris? And that was kind of some of that basis. So, yeah, like you said, he is higher IQ, higher average IQ, but doesn't necessarily have the utility of a larger education at his grasp. But he can make a lot of things happen. I wouldn't call him brilliant, but I would say he's intelligent for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
His flashes of brilliance, maybe, but yeah.
And I mean, maybe the intention is everything that he says and acts on is strictly based on his observation, which seems to be primarily the case. That's how all of his accents come to be, all of his mannerisms. Most of his understanding is observational understanding. It just feels so complete that you would assume that some of it would need to be external, but maybe it's not. Maybe he's just experienced enough and he absorbs all of it.
I think there's a good chance of that, right?
We know he's been a Ruff's lawman since he was 16. So
yeah, right. He's been the tag along.
Traditional education isn't a thing for him. So unless it's before that point, but if that's the case, that doesn't stick that well. So not like Marasi, not like Steris.
Right. Not at all like either of them, because they just have a completely different upbringing. So
did Steris have educational upbringing mentioned?
Yes, Steris was. Yeah, I mean, she was educated inside of society. Like, she was the wealth that enabled her family, enabled her education, without question.
I didn't remember if she went to a college like Marasi did.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm not certain about college. I'm thinking even a high school education.
Okay. Fair.
Which is more my point with Wayne, is comparatively he's of a similar scholastic background of what I would assume is a late junior high, early high school dropout.
Mm-hmm.
So that was more my context on that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. There's also a note about how they managed to connect the pieces of the previous poem and how Wax has been played to be more at odds with the populace than he expected. There's a lot of kind of unwieldy sort of things that he hasn't realized that he's being manipulated here, which I think is great for us to talk about.
Yeah, we're getting into this really cool sort of puppet master scenario with Bleeder, where she's the prey, but she's also the puppet master, and I can't help but love the unsettling feeling that it imposes upon Wax, or that's imposed upon Wax through that sort of realization throughout this entire section of the shifting of understanding of where this person is compared to himself. And it suddenly feels underneath them.
It starts to in its own way, right? And there's this other sort of awareness that you're talking about that these characters have and or lack at different times, right? Because we're locked into their perspectives, that I think really comes to fruition as we start to think about the parallels here between book 1 and book 1, right? And I think to some degree, Edwarn forces that conversation, so I think we'll hold until the end of this chapter to discuss that. But that's where the parallels start to become, and the invert parallels start to become really, really fascinating. So we'll save that for when we get to Edwarn. But
sounds good.
Milan is left to assemble, or I guess digest, the remains of one of the women of whom were protecting the governor to blend in as someone around him in the future to protect him from future strikes against him. We're reminded of a couple of the rules of Conjure here and given a couple of parameters around their behavior that we may have otherwise forgotten and or have been completely unaware of, because if this is your first entry into Mistborn, that's what they're here for. Milan also kind of hits on Wayne, and he claims to be taken, which we know to really not be true, unless it's just locked in his own mind that way. Harmony also gives the okay for Wax to go and visit the Conjure homeland here, which is just another small note that gets tucked inside of the whole thing from Milan, in which they are obviously speaking to each other.
Yeah, a reminder about the hair. Like that's something that I know I mentioned, and we had a discussion about.
We did
Hero of Ages when it came up, but it went kind of unaddressed until now. But now we actually get the mechanics of it, and I think we kind of did a little bit, but it was a little bit. This made it more clear, so that was good. I liked that, and it gives this potential gotcha for a Kandra in a rush to try to catch him in that way. So like that's cool, getting the mechanics and getting a failure point. I don't mind that he considers himself to be taken, even if it's not true. Even if he's strictly alone in that assumption of himself. And it gets to maybe there'd be awkward or problematic interactions between himself and Renette directly, but for him in this scenario where he's not near Renette, for him to consider himself taken, I don't see a problem in that. And it creates a really comedic scenario between him and Milan, where it feels funny that Milan would be attracted to Wayne in the slightest. But it makes it even funnier that Wayne pushes against that by treating himself as taken. And I don't think anybody's hurt by this.
No, for sure. Yeah, I guess it's not necessarily that there are any like negative connotations or that like there's any harm done. It's very much like a no harm, no foul kind of thing. But it does at the very least point to maybe. It's not that Wayne's an unreliable narrator. It's that maybe he's not his his perception is so warped that it's hard for it to be predictable even.
Right. But that's the thing. It's warped, but it's not unpredictable. It's warped but consistent.
Kinda. I mean, mostly. But I'm not saying that this is necessarily inconsistent in this moment. He has said that there's one woman for him, and that's Renette in the previous book. Like, I totally get that, and I understand that perspective.
I mean, I guess that's where I'm coming from, is that he is not being in any way inconsistent. And in no way is he unpredictable. It's just odd and detached from reality. But there is a rule set that his mind is following. And that extends into his conversations with Renette later.
Yeah, okay.
It's not healthy, and it's not necessarily good, but it's not hurtful, I guess is where
you raise a fair point, especially when you consider the fact that when we're inside of his perspective, it does feel like we have a rule set. From the outside, purely the outside looking in, from from Wax's perspective, he knows strictly because of exposure over time that this exists. Marisi, for instance, doesn't and is constantly questioning, some of Wax's decisions and actions. Not Wax, Wayne's decisions and actions. And Wax is generally reaffirming them as like, no, this is the way he'll do it. And it will work out because he's predictable, like you're saying. But he seems like a wild card, but is in fact a joker or a jester or whatever the fuck else.
He's not rooted in reality, but that doesn't mean he's not rooted in anything. Like
you're right.
his perception is rooted. It's just not in the same reality as everybody else lives within.
You're totally correct.
He's consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes Wayne such a cool character to explore.
It totally does. It's just so interesting to me that it is so outside of the normal realm. You know what I mean? Like it is. This is very unusual to have such a.
Do you expect anything else from a hard fantasy author, though?
Absolutely. What do you mean?
I mean, he's building a rule set for his own character that breaks the social norm. He's not allowing his character to be ruleless.
No, I understand the direction in which you're going with kind of the question and the prompt. I guess I love Wayne to death. He's not a relatable character in a lot of ways. Like he feels. This is what we were kind of talking about earlier. There are moments where he feels like a cartoon or a caricature, but we still love him to death because he just is, right? So I guess that's what I'm trying to pick at. It's not that I think that he's inconsistent or that I don't think that, like, you know, I understand where Brandon can come from because of the way, like you're saying, he can write strict systems, and so creating a character that adheres to a strict system works. I'm not disbelieving any of that. As a matter of fact, I agree with a lot of it. Just trying to work out the rest.
I guess where I'm coming from in this sort of conversation is that I would expect Wayne to be written as this wacky, zany, off the wall, doesn't need an explanation character.
Sure.
In reality, every single action he takes is rooted in something that we're not necessarily privy to.
Yes. Because of his lived experience, right? Which is what he's also constantly espousing. He's trying to give us more and more and more of that lived experience. So
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm sure there are examples that would push against this, but it just feels like he's a very well planned character.
I love Wayne. I don't believe you're also trying. No, you're also not telling me that I don't love Wayne. So.
No, it's just he comes across as chaos, and I don't think he's necessarily bouncing off the walls as much as he seems to be at face value. Yes,
that's a great way of putting it. I definitely agree. We move to a conversation between Edwarn and Wax, and boy, what a conversation it is. What do you make of this moment and his uncle's political endeavors? What new things are you taking from this about the set with an SET, the set, and their goals? What about his companions, or not his companions? What about his comparisons to the Final Empire?
This is really hard. Is it in any way fair to judge him against his supposed other members of the set? And like, do we have to judge his actions alone? Because comparatively, if he's to be believed, he's the one acting reasonably within this organization. And it's still fucked up, but it's not the malicious, pure evil that we're presented with to begin with. It's much more complex. It's much more rooted. And I mean, if we take him at his word, he's the one kind of holding the organization back from truly unhinged shit.
There's a question there. Should we be taking him at his word, though?
That's a completely different question. And
well, I think it addresses some of that, which is like, how far can we believe this guy? I mean, the guy faked his own death to escape, but there is a lot to ask about the set.
The fact that he's working with and the fact that he is accepting any sort of collaboration between him and Wax tells me that he's at least partially truthful here.
Is it a collaboration, or is it a belief that his nephew can be corrupted?
We know contextually that Bleeder is working with the set.
Adjacent to, I think, is the way that it's almost phrased. But yes, context
here makes it seem that it's more than adjacent.
Like, it's not a part of their plans, but it does work in their advantage.
Yeah.
They're not stopping, but they're not,
At the very least, this feels like the Syndicate.
Sure.
And the Duke of Hands. And that sort of structure. Where there's autonomy, but still somebody above ultimately pulling the strings, even if they're not in control.
Yeah. I see that. And I think that I don't know if we have such an explicit, as it's been explained, the organization feels a little bit more democratic than most crime syndicates are, if that makes sense. It seems more like it's a group of people with economic stake in society and otherwise in wanting to push it forward. And there are a lot of parallels that happen between here and the Final Empire, and he specifically draws a lot of lines between the idea of rebelling and overthrowing a government and everything else being important and crucial to rising up against, odds. And this is where I think we start to get to an interesting point where it feels like a almost asymmetrical look at the same kind of story, if that makes sense. So last time we were looking from the rebels and trying to kill the cops. And this time we're looking from the cops to the rebels, but the rebels are bad and the cops are good. Like, and it's all based on perspective. And I think that's what the story does such a good job on. And that's also why I want to try to distance a little bit from the Bleeder to Ed Warren connection, just a smidge, because Bleeder feels like a source of truth in a way, like feels like objectively they have less of a stake in that game, if that makes sense, versus these two organizations, these two systems and structures that are fighting each other. So,
okay,
Bleeder's fighting for like almost a third party truth, it feels like.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you entirely, with the one exception being that this is a parallel to what we were fighting against in the first trilogy, because I don't think it's a two-sided fight. And I think what we saw was the people in the first trilogy, and comparatively, we would be more in the camp of the mid-level obligators and inquisitors. And that's still not a good point of view to hold in that first trilogy, but it's not the same as holding the point of view of the Lord Ruler, for example.
Fair point. Yeah. Anything that I would say would be such a minor adjustment that I don't think it's worth interrogating on that perspective. But I do agree with you. But it's also as close as we can get, right? Because there isn't really an emperor. The governor isn't the emperor. He's, as we learn in just a little bit here, he's just a fucking dude for the most part. Like,
yeah, basically
trying to do the best that he can, but the best that he can is politically motivated and manipulated, and there's a lot of other shit there. But yeah, man. Anything else in Edborn? Anything else you wanted to say about the dude, about the man, about the bro?
I don't think so at the moment. I think that's it.
Cool. All right. With that, we get into chapter 18. We return to this chapter with Marcy Combs sitting in on Governor Innate, having a meeting with his closest advisors. There are some interesting observations she makes here about the groups of men, but mostly she just sits back and lets the show happen in front of her. She comments even that she'd always desired to be in the room where it happens. The room where it happens. The room. If you still haven't listened to Hamilton, it's all right. All right. But had never been lucky enough to do so. What do you make of this entire kind of scene and sequence from a political standpoint for Marcy and the way that she's changed since before we met her, but at the very least, an interesting, parallel to her upbringing?
In this section as a whole, generally, but also this chapter specifically, we get a lot of internal vulnerability from Marcy, and she finds herself within her role, like how she finds herself within her role. And that comes basically through her connection to Wax. Despite her diligence in schooling and integrity and whatever else, she's close to wax that more than likely gets her this position right now, based on her perception and context. That's where we're at. And whether or not she deserves it or if she's the right fit, it's true. It's hard to argue that that's the case. And I think it's fitting, given that she's faced with this meeting of a man that she knows to be politically corrupt, and like facing these feelings of not necessarily inadequacy, but something close to it, of deservedness and earning her spot through past corruption, I guess. It's lesser, but it's still government corruption. And that is a mirror that she's facing down when looking at innate. And I don't think that irony is lost on her. And I believe, given this, she would make a great leader due to her interest and her aptitude and her integrity, pushing against this idea that she gained this position. The sickness that she feels in her stomach when she's like addressing the idea that she got this position through wax as opposed to her internal aptitude.
Yeah, I do want to, it's not exactly nepotism, but it's like a side effect of nepotism. You know what I mean? Like that's how this placement happened. It's an oligarchical problem. It's the reason that you end up in these rooms is not because of capability. It's because of who it's more or less, or who you are.
Nepotism.
How's it reverse nepotism?
Because it's not hiring because because you're close to this person in the industry. It's, this person and we want to keep an eye on this person.
Sure. Yeah. I wouldn't equate that to nepotism. I understand exactly what you're saying. Wouldn't equate it to nepotism, but I definitely get it.
But it follows the same rules as nepotism, and it's hard to say it's reverse.
It's an adjacent network. It's not. Yeah. I understand where you're going. The core point, nepotism generally being within the family. So I was stretching nepotism to include, but
I think nepotism technically doesn't have to do with familial ties. It just has to do with personal connection. So I think friendships technically fall under nepotism.
Ooh, friendships do technically fall under nepotism, but it is first and foremost described as favoritism on family relatives. So, all right, fine. I'll give it to you. Yeah, okay. Then in which case I can understand your description. That makes sense to me. I think there's a specific word for the people that leading to that. Like, I think there's a more specific phrase. I don't remember it, so we'll pass it by. But yeah, it is a form of nepotism in this moment and circumstance that has led it to her. And it is also there's a moment of acknowledgement that they can use her nepotic position to backward spy.
Nepotistic?
Right? Nepotistic? Nepotic?
I don't know.
I was thinking despot and despotic, which is where I went, but yeah. Mm-hmm. Nepotistic is probably correct. Anyway, point being that they can reverse spy is what you're suggesting. So because of the sort of nepotism, they can use that against her and kind of wield that power backwards.
Right.
Down the train. Yeah.
It's just okay. Whether or not the irony is that she's not, if that was the case, she's not aware. Mm-hmm. And the connection isn't as obvious in the position that she's in. It's not reverse nepotism, but it's something like that,
Yeah. I mean, it's using her own power against her. I mean, there are a number of different ways to probably pin this tail on the donkey. A lot of tails that are great options. It's just a matter of which is the
right one,
which is our best fit. So yeah, I love this moment. I love the sort of solo moment there, but eventually he sends the others away and gives Marcy an important duty to hand off a call for martial law to be enacted in the city and for Aradel to handle it. I love the parallels that this week poses to us as she leaves with the order and looks out at the city while waiting for her carriage. There's this note about the survivor long ago pushing a city to a similar brink, but then channeling it into a rebellion. It's a fun little thing to contemplate from Maricy's perspective and to think about how these first books in their respective trilogies are these like asymmetrical pieces against each other. And I think in particular, considering the way that the cities are positioned and the people and the POVs that we're seeing are on opposite sides, while not perfectly inverted sides or positions of power, makes for a very interesting conversation about handling people.
Yeah.
Because what's the end result here? You quell the rebellion and keep the status quo during the Industrial Revolution. We know that that's not a fucking good thing for people in the long run. You know, like we know the outcome of that as people. So yeah, what do you think?
I think that what I talked about at the beginning of this episode with Maricy becoming like a character that I really appreciated. This is that section.
Mm-hmm.
This is where she becomes a character that I want to inhabit rather than one that we need to inhabit or one that gives extra textual context to the recent history of the world. Like she was a utility for most, I'd say the entirety of the first book and most of this book up until now. And now she's becoming a standalone, interesting character in and of herself. And maybe that happened before, but this is when I felt it, you know? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. This is when it really clicks that she becomes something for you at the very least. This is where she becomes something more. This is where it becomes like, I want more of that perspective. I want to dig deeper into the way that Maricy thinks about the world, which I totally get. I think that that's something that Alloy of Law, she kind of feels like a tool in the tool belt. And so it's a tool for the story to progress itself. And here now it's become something different. And she's grown in a way where like you want to spend time with her. And because the way the story is written, we don't get a whole lot of time in general. Like everything is kind of a tool to get us to the end, you know, and a tool to solve the problem or the mystery.
She felt like a stand-in for the logbooks, frankly.
I disagree with that personally, but I understand. But yeah, I understand.
Okay.
That perspective, as we had talked about it before.
It wasn't necessarily her perspective entirely, but like she was constantly giving extra information that she learned in school. And it was her speaking nervously. And it was very important for us to learn it, but there was no real good way to share that information for us, like to us. So leaning on this nervous character that just spewed information was effectively what we got instead of the logbooks. That's where I'm coming from, I guess.
Personal preference. I would take a nervous character giving me something versus a logbook any day of the week. Because it's in POV, it's in perspective, it's potentially
It wasn't always
jaded.
in perspective, though. It was sometimes Maricy like muttering to herself in Wax's perspective.
It's still in a perspective. I guess that's my point. Is it's in the story. It's submerged in the moment. There are a couple of times that it can make sense. Like I said, it's a taste thing, but that is where I land on sort of the taste spectrum, which is character delivery yields everything in the long run. Like characters are the reason that we focus on the story. That's why we love the story. Systems are cool, but systems without a character, you may as well be reading a wiki.
Yeah, but there's a character. We just don't know who they are.
We did know who they were.
Sometimes.
I mean, even in the end, I don't think that. Yeah, it's not worth the conversation in the immediate moment. But we just land on different sides of this coin.
I like logbooks.
I think logbooks
and I like
and extra textual stuff
devoid of
can be useful.
Emotion.
Combat devoid of emotion yields.
It creates something cinematic.
It is devoid of description that imparts. We're so. You can have combat that gives emotion that is just as cinematic. That's my point. What is tough?
How do you do that in film?
Expression, facial expression, exhaustion, physical exhaustion. Like you do it all the time. Not everyone's great at it. That's what makes some of the fights in Game of Thrones as good as they are, is because you feel what the character's feeling in the moment when they swing the sword and it's the last thing that they could do. You feel the exhaustion as, who's it? Rickon is running away.
Those are all still physical descriptions.
No, you see the looks on their face.
That's still a physical description.
Okay, but Brandon does not explain the looks on people's faces as they're doing things and the extent to which
people's faces.
Yeah, exactly. That's my fucking point. Like, I don't think you're comparing things fairly whatsoever. You're nitpicking to try to get to making it make sense.
I'm trying to get at you, but I do, I do like that combat.
All I'm saying is when Sanderson is eventually adapted, we'll get more emotion in the adaptation than we did in the original text. 100%.
I will complain about it.
You shouldn't. It will yield better scenes.
I'm fucking with you. I'm fucking with you entirely.
Friends at home, send help. All right. She does leave this situation, of course, and goes and calls for a carriage to call her home. It's going to take a little bit of time for her to find a carriage, according to the carriage caller, because all of them are out in different places summoning people, as we found out earlier from Wax. Like, this is a very reasonable thing to be going on in a night like this with everything that's happening. So she heads back into the mansion and she finds some dirt on the governor. It turns out that, as suspected, he truly is a corrupt man owing favors to many others in the cities, as we've talked about a little bit previously, as well as he's tracking those of whom owe him a favor. What do you think about this?
It's just embarrassing letters between him and several notable people around town. It's all romantic, nothing more. Don't dwell on it. Push it aside. No harm, no foul.
Is that how it works?
That's how it works. Don't dwell on the slander. No. It's so cool to see her go through this, like, sleuthing. It just feels so quick and so obvious and so... Well, I have lost Crossland. Are you back?
Continue. So obvious. Yep.
It feels...
Cut, just in case.
Compared
just
to other things within this story,
Yeah.
It just feels a little forced.
You feel it's forced?
Yeah, I did. I would have preferred her to stumble upon the information and the notebook of information, as opposed to making a fake difficult to understand or difficult to catch series of tests to find the hidden treasure trove of information. You know, like the scuffs on the books and the hidden key and the zero explanation to suddenly finding the hidden vault. Like, it just felt too forced into very quickly finding this hidden, like,
sure, yeah. A little bit BBC Sherlock, which is that we didn't really see the things, so we don't really know why in moments. I mean, I love BBC Sherlock, don't get me wrong, folks. But at the same time, when you don't have the pieces to set up the puzzle, it's not really solving a puzzle, which is, again, I think what we've kind of gotten at in this episode a little bit, which is this is written almost to feel like a murder mystery in moments, or like a mystery that we're supposed to be solving and piecing together. However, we're not being given the pieces to assemble. So it makes it very hard for us to even consider, because basically what we're given instead, like in this moment, is the sort of trope of the room in which, you find the clues.
There's a vault under the rug, and you found the key. Yeah. It's
convoluted.
It would have made more sense for Marisy's character to at least stumble upon something somehow
that leads
accidentally
her
leads her to where she needs to be. But instead,
she noticed it earlier.
She sneaks into the office and forces her way into finding a secret compartment, and like it just didn't feel earned, and felt really out. It felt like it was there out of necessity as opposed to being there out of mechanics.
Like it was something there to feed the plot.
Not even.
I mean, it was, but yeah.
But I guess
it's furthering a plot point. I mean, regardless, I guess
it's
my
giving
point was,
her it's giving her the proof as opposed to, well, it's not even that. She has, what's it called? Not contextual, but circumstantial proof of her supposition. And this gives her slightly better circumstantial proof. It doesn't even give her hard proof because it's still written in kind of code.
This is hard proof acquired by ill-begotten means. Like, this is not...
It's not hard proof because it's not saying, I'm doing this for you for this favor. It's per our previous conversation, the funds are on its way. It still requires lining up previous supposed accusations, but there's nothing technically tying him down to wrongdoing. It's still circumstantial.
I guess that's something that Ardell gets into a little bit more in the next chapter, right? Like there are still circumstantial points, but I don't think that's... I guess that's not
evidence, but it's not hard evidence.
I'm not an Ellendale lawyer and would never pretend to be one on the internet for money.
But that's
I actually don't know any Ellendale lawyers.
Marcy makes that point and says that it's not hard proof.
I know. I was just making a joke.
I know.
No one's an Ellendale lawyer. No one could pretend to be one on the internet.
And can pretend to be one on the internet.
Well, I guess everyone could pretend to be one. I don't pretend to be one on the internet. Copying the Tim Ferriss line. But all that said, I personally don't have an issue with the evidence itself. She does say that it's circumstantial at best. But I do think there's a bit of a plot contrivance here as far as it comes to discovering and getting to the information. That just is what it is, I think. I don't know if there's a better way to break it down. Like there's just a point of criticism. Like this is...
It just feels out of nowhere.
It is. I don't know if there's any other way to put it, because it's not as though, again, going back to like some writing 101, not writing 101, but some like general writing rules is setups and payoffs, of which I know Brandon talks a lot about. But like this scene in which we get this information is not set up. The information itself is. We're led to believe that this is the case for most of the novel, but the way in which our character acquires the information is not something that's been set up or paid off. This is just strictly a contrivance. Yeah. It's convenience. That's okay.
Fair.
It's not a full detriment to the story. It's just unfortunate because so much of the rest of the story is so well grounded that these mystery elements really get swept up in the rest of it.
It is unfortunate in that the only way this payoff feels satisfying to me that I can see going forward is if it's entirely wrong and every worst case scenario comes true, in that this is entirely circumstantial and there was a major piece of information that we've been missing that completely overwrites all of our presuppositions about what we've learned.
And then that pays off her naivete, or rather it pays off naivete in general, right? Like it pays off Ardell's perspective, which is that like, this is ill-begotten. It's not proof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only way I see this being a meaningful payoff.
Sure. That makes sense to me. I take it. Okay. We move back to Wax, and this is almost entirely internal dialogue and thoughts on what he should be doing in these moments. We talked about it earlier, but Wax is broken after bringing Leslie back up into the equation and like really hitting him. He contemplates leaving, but that brings him to thinking about his perspective on freedom. To quote here, "No, freedom was not the lack of responsibilities. It was being able to do what was right without having to worry it was also wrong. And man, he's really grappling with his own like deep, dark thoughts in these moments, especially as he contemplates the general idea of being a lawman in the moment.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating perspective and definition of freedom. I think it's right to point out the darkness that Wax is wrestling with here. I think that would probably, though, ring true for him even if he wasn't kind of in this scenario. He's always going to feel like that definition of freedom is always going to ring true for him, even if there's not this sort of moral ambiguity looming over him. I think that's just how he approaches law enforcement. Bringing it back to Batman, he embodies Batman here. Like, his sense of justice is entirely predicated on vindication and retribution, not legal justice.
He's a firm believer in Ruff's justice, is what it feels more and more like. Like but he's willing to abide by other rules, but he believes in that kind of firm person-to-person justice more and more. And PJ, I don't know what you're talking about with vindication, because that's just a gun.
Fair. Good point.
But yeah, no, I totally get it, obviously. No, I think it's a great read.
I'll defend the vindication is just a gun part too, in that. Because I think you could still make that work.
You could arguably still make that work. Actually, even in the way that you were phrasing it in the moment, I was like, my vindication joke that I have here probably isn't going to be that good, huh? The moment you said vindication, I was like, well, I got to bring it up. But yeah, no, for sure. I really do. I appreciate brooding can become a lot in books if you spend too much time brooding, if you spend too much time doing this. But I think that this is just the right amount of internal reflection, especially considering the dark section in which we just inhabited. Honestly, Wax being at his lowest in a couple of chapters. I mean, the fact that he defaced his uncle and he couldn't just fucking kill him on the spot or arrest him in some way, shape, or form, that feels bad for him. And then you have him facing off with Bleeder and speaking into his mind, which is the craziest kind of mind fucky if it's not something you're seriously used to. He's had it happen with Harmony, I guess, Harmony being there, but this isn't normal. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What a mess for him.
Yeah.
Emotionally. Yeah.
Yeah. Things are so much more tumultuous than I think he could have ever imagined, because he's been doing this for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never been that difficult for him.
Right.
To center himself and come up with an answer.
Yeah, not at all. Never this difficult, at the very least.
And now there's somebody actually answering, external to him.
Someone answering the call. Not only is there one person answering the call, there's a couple. And that brings perspective into question. Yeah.
That's so fucked.
With that, let's get into our last chapter here of the week. We move in chapter 19, which is our last chapter. We move again to Wayne, and this time we're in a room with Governor Innate, who sends both a disguised Milan and a bewildered Wayne to chat on their own away, and does so under the guise of you can't stop someone with ferrochemical speed. You're incapable of doing that. Don't what? And they share a lot in this moment, though, in which they have a fun conversation between these two folks regarding disguises, accents, and the like. They even make comparisons between wearing the bones as a conjurer and Wayne's opinions on hats and how they're helpful as well. There's just a lot of sort of a building of shared affection or an appreciation for each other here. They even briefly chat about the life of the conjurer and immortality and how now they found a way to end their lives, kind of ceasing to being, not ending in a negative context, more of a choosing to not be alive. What do you think about the whole thing? This is a great little chunk.
I mean, because we haven't brought it up yet today, this is a jaw-droppingly amazing performance by Michael Kramer. This section between Wayne and Milan, in that they are constantly shifting accents in a way that is described and makes sense. And they're also maintaining their voice. So you have two voices going back and forth talking to each other, but constantly and modularly changing their accents. And Michael Kramer is able to keep up with it and perform it as perfectly as I could have guessed it could have been performed. It is astonishing. And I truly wish every single person that reads this book could listen to that excerpt, because it's one of the best audiobook readings I've ever experienced. It's short, it's sweet, and it ultimately doesn't matter that much, but it proves the adeptitude of Michael Kramer and his understanding of what he's doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that this is an excellent show of skill for Michael Kramer. And is also part of the reason that this chapter is as long as it is, because it is actually, by page count, as long as the other chapters, the last 3 chapters. This is not that much of a longer chapter than the last 2 or 3 that we've read. The reason that the audiobook is an extra 10 minutes is because he takes time to go through these things and really enunciate the differences as he goes through and says these words as a Toofy, and as Wayne readdresses and being like, no, Toofy would talk more like this, and then they adjust and they have this like back and forth. And you really get the feel from one person that there are 2 characters in the room and they're teaching each other accents, which is great. I wouldn't go so far as to say what you were saying about it being truly one of the most incredible performances ever. I do think Michael Kramer is very consistent at delivering performances like this, but it is one of the most unique scenes I've heard in audio. It is incredible.
I meant one of Michael Kramer's best performances.
Oh, it's definitely one of Michael Kramer's best. Definitely one of the best that you've heard so far, and likely in the top 5. Yeah.
That's amazing. I don't know how
many
books he does, because
I thought you were saying audiobooks in general is like, I don't know, man.
TGR, man.
Personally. TGR, man. I love Michael Kramer. I listened to Michael Kramer long before I listened to TGR, but I'd take TGR if I had to choose, gun to head.
But either way, this is insane.
You're comparing a 9.5 to a 9. Like,
yeah, I love it. I just love it. So there's that. It's phenomenal. The Bones and Hat comparison is something that I hadn't expected, but I think makes total sense. But at the same time, makes me wonder, do I think this makes sense because we've inhabited Wayne's brain for a little bit? So it has it makes sense because we've seen it. I don't know. Then we get into the discussion about Khandra ending their own lives. And I'm not sure if we're to believe that is talking about the Khandra removing their spikes, which was referred to as the Suicide Pact. And we've learned, obviously, now that that's not necessarily a permanent death, because those spikes can be reintegrated into and becomes the same consciousness and the same people. But if those spikes are removed in a way where they can't be reintegrated into the same body, that is effectively suicide. So that's an interesting point to take, and I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah, I think that it's something about there's more of a winding down that can happen with the Khandra. Not that it's just removing the spikes, right? Because like you were saying, the resolution, which is what I was referred to as before, was removing the spikes and turning themselves back into mistrates, basically. So,
right,
that's that portion of it.
Exactly. But if those spikes are then do we know yet if both spikes need to stay paired in order to reconstitute a Khandra?
Suggesting that consciousness is stored in the spikes or the pair of spikes? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think that we know that.
So any two spikes could reconstitute an existing Mist Wraith into its previous Khandra form.
Likely.
Okay.
Wait, conceptually, yeah.
Okay. So this probably means that there's a separate death option.
It's definitely a separate death option. This is, I think, as described by Milan, it is completely outside of the resolution. This is meant to be an actual winding down, because pulling out the spikes isn't death. It's a loss of sentience, which I think is a really interesting definition.
Now, but they didn't understand that before.
Definitely. I guess my point is that more now, as we understand it, like, a loss of sentience isn't exactly death. You still exist. You just don't have your wits about you, and you could be brought back at any point, right? You're just in stasis. So I find that delineation is actually a really important thing, and something that often, to be honest, isn't debated in fantasy, is more often debated in science fiction as it comes to, you know, people that preserve themselves in computers or otherwise. So
right.
It's a nice little appendage to the story, being like, yes, the immortal people do have a death if they choose to accept it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Like elves never die in Lord of the Rings.
True.
Until like
is
the
that true?
Third Age. Yeah. They're reborn. Well, there's some convoluted stuff here, but to explain it as quickly as possible without interrogating it too much, near the Third Age, they start to fade, and so the fading would equal death because of their distance from Valinor and everything else. Over time, like, they've wandered from the light, or the light is no longer there, right? So they have to head back. When they were dying in the Second Age and the First Age, they would basically respawn at the tree. However, at a certain point, the tree stopped respawning them when they were on Middle Earth, basically.
God, I need to go back and reread all this.
Yeah, there's a fucking lot there, but that's effectively the rules. That's how it shook out. So most elves didn't experience death, but there was a time in the Second Age in which they did, and that was because the AR did not agree with what the elves were doing on Middle Earth and did not believe that it was of the light, and so they changed the rules of the tree for a while. So anyway, regardless. So getting back to the story here. Brunette eventually arrives, and there's a bit of confrontation between these two. Even if it just does rotate around Wayne holding onto a bullet, and kind of this idea of him even being associated with a gun, he gets that similar kind of sickness that he feels. He keeps pressing this romance angle, though, with her, of course, and she won't budge even the slightest bit.
Yeah, I'm sure that someone who understands psychology better than I do could dig into the trauma that Wayne has faced and how that might change how he interacts and perceives affection. But that's not me. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to pretend to be one on the internet.
Wait, really? You're not? Just kidding.
But what I can see is that, like, the idea that she's not digging at him as hard as she usually does is unusual. So something is wrong. And the fact that he sees that as her being less interested in him is definitely kind of a red flag about his perception of healthy relationships. But I don't know where to go from there. You know, like there is sort of an inverse here when it comes to the perception of affection when it comes to Wayne, but I couldn't tell you what that actually means.
There's definitely something to the psychology of Wayne here, right? Which is to say that, like, a lot of his life has been driven around the idea of servitude to others, and that servitude specifically coming through, not always, but a lot of the time through demeaning, people demeaning him for the actions that he's taken in the past, right? And so I think in these moments, in particular, we can point to Renette and be like, well, part of the reason that he's sticking around is because he's recognizing the same sort of abusive patterns that he's lived with and, like, that he's absorbed into his life, right? The fact that she pushes back against him in a lot of the same ways that the family that he gives money to, for killing their father. It's the same kind of thing. And so he's created some cyclical patterns in his lifestyles where he's become subservient to those people. I mean, Wax is different, but even the origin with Wax is a similar basis where there's power there that Wax has over him. Wax doesn't wield it by any stretch. He doesn't hold it over his head or even consider holding it over his head, but it's still a thing, I think, that we can talk about in the back of his mind.
Right.
So, yeah. Makes it a whole thing. So it makes the relationship with Renette very interesting.
Yeah.
So we move from there to Marasi and Aradel and his appointment as High Lord Constable. He shakes it off, not having anticipated this, position of power that he would be placed in, as well as the fact that he doesn't have the lordship with which to claim it. But then he proceeds to lay out a plan to gather up the constable generals in the mansion as a base of operations. They take off on horses, the pair of them, and I really appreciate the little internal monologue here about modesty in society, really being unable to refuse women's roles in society, despite also demanding unjustly, similarly ladylike behavior from these people. And as Marasi states, it's a heavy double standard. Like, this is a lot that's kind of going on here. There's some plot beats, but then there's also this monologue, right?
Yeah,
we finally get to the...
There's very obviously the modern day real world parallel that can be made between like that little bit of narration and our society as a whole. And in that respect, I think this monologue does a really good job of making that point very succinct and clear. So
I think it adds a ton of clarity. And I think that that's a lot of the intent here, is to like really layer on understanding onto the double standard of being expected to perform and hold these stasises and how that's unfair versus other people of other stations. But that said, we finally get to the confrontation and what you wanted to share throughout this entire section, that there is corruption here of the governor Nate and how he's ran his government, and bringing this to the constable general and now I think High Lord Constable General's attention. What do you think about Aradel in this moment, the information that is being brought? We talked a little bit about how she acquired it and obviously the sort of nature of the information, but what do you think about his position against the information, and as such, how he is positioned for or against Innate himself?
I like that we don't have that sort of trope of, how would you call it, this beat cop finding something and blowing the lid off of a giant story, because Aradel knows, based on previous conversations with Marasi, and basically figures that this is going to be coming down the pipe soon. But it still feels satisfying to present it, and I fought against the fact that this could be considered proof, but it's more proof than it was, and it's being presented, and that's still satisfying. So I think there's a realm of realism that we're plopped into that feels good to be within. And I don't know if that's any more realistic than actual realism, but it feels more realistic. I don't know.
I think that it leads us to a conclusion, right? And it is that regardless of the circumstantial nature or the nature in which the information was claimed, or any of the other portions of information that we've even gotten from other perspectives, such as Innate's brother, we can draw the conclusion that Innate is a corrupt government official. Regardless of whether or not they can prove it, we know at this point that Innate is a bad dude.
For sure.
Especially considering the way that he runs the city. Aradel had his hunches and suspicions. This goes further to help some of those things, but at the same time, it's not conclusive like we had determined before. It's not the single piece of information. It's circumstantial in a lot of cases, and also acquired by ill-begotten means.
I mean, all of it comes from Marasi, right? in every direction?
No. I'm sorry. Are you talking about the information as it comes to Aerodel?
Yeah.
No, I think that there's some outside kind of general conversations and undercurrents, and this is reaffirming undercurrents.
Okay.
This is the quote, solid evidence quote on top of the whole thing. It's not solid, but it's enough to point in the direction of like, there's a genuine undercurrent here. And this is real information, despite maybe not being, concrete enough proof to put in front of a jury to, pull the man out into the town square, the Listerborne Square, and flog him. But, it's enough. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of my core point.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So we return to Wax as he visits the Field of Rebirth. He notes right off the bat, and I think that it's crucial, that it looks the same as it did when the world ended in the last trilogy. We get a lot of splashes of the old trilogy here throughout. The originators of whom have each been given names, like the Lady of Truth, which appears to have gone. I guess that's maybe a question. Does Lady of Truth go to Tindwyl, or does it go to Our Lady Rioter?
Fuck no.
But there. Yeah, of course you'd say that. But there's a lot of like fun little beats that happen here inside of the originator tomb. There's the Doxin pages. There's some Doxil epigraphs or something like that. There's a number of different writings that are stored. There are all of the different components here that are really excellent. And everyone's kind of given names in various degrees, except for Hammond. And I God, I fucking love Ham. And the fact that like Ham doesn't have a nickname is the most simultaneously fitting and unbefitting thing for him. And you know what? It just paints him as a regular dude among a bunch of guys. And at the same time, I think that's what he would have wanted, because he was always the soldier's friend, I don't know.
For sure.
Ham's position is fun.
Yeah, he is. I thought what was really funny beyond the Ham thing was the description of the Field of Rebirth being maintained exactly as it was. But all the flowers are cultivated and curated in a line, and there are porta potties, and like it's very clearly inspired by but not maintained exactly as described. So I found that funny. I don't know.
I do agree with you. I think that there's something kind of humorous about the idea that this would ever be preserved exactly as it was. Mm-hmm. And I have this sinking sensation to some degree that over the eras, this field will slowly become smaller. And that makes me sad, but is also something that happens over generations of time. So
right.
We'll see.
True.
All right. We end this chapter this week with Wax eventually making his way into the museum and then down into the tomb, slipping through and noticing a number of different replicas and artifacts. Specifically, there are two pairs that are mentioned. There's Harmony's bands, and then there's also the Bands of Mourning, when he's confronted by a voice to end this week that says, "I've been waiting for you." And that's where our week ends.
Yeah, fuck. That's so fucked, dude. Why would you do this to me?
This is such a great chapter in PJ.
It's not.
There was nothing
so
better.
Dumb. I hate you.
There was nothing better. This is such a good end.
This is so good.
The option was to end here or in the last chapter, and I was like, this is where we end for sure. Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Yeah, it is.
Did you listened to it?
Yep.
Did you have any takeaways on the voice? Do you have any thoughts, predictions? Who this could be?
I mean, it's hard to overshadow anything beyond that section of voice with Wayne and Milan. Mm-hmm. But in general, it's all done so well. It's hard to rag against anything, honestly.
Oh, no. I meant, do you have any guesses as to who the character is that's voicing this?
Oh.
Do you think it's new? Do you think it's existing?
I don't know. I can't recall. It felt Bleeder-like.
Sure.
I don't think it's anyone that's already established within this book. or I think within this series. Oh, wait, actually, I take that back. It sounded very much like Marsh. And it makes sense. It makes sense for him to meet Marsh. So I'm going to go ahead and guess it's Marsh.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I dig. That's exciting. Cool. I'll turn that into a little mini prediction. We'll find out next week because we end the book next week, which is so much fun.
Yes.
So that's going to be very fun here. Obviously, we've got some predictions that are going to be paid off, but nothing is immediate here. So we'll see if those pay off next week or if we hold them over between books here. So next week, we're reading Shadows of Self, chapters 20 through the end. Chapters 20 through the end. That's it. And then we're through the fucking book already. Mm-hmm. So that's where we'll leave you for this week.
Thank you, as ever, to our producers, Tim and Andrew, for helping us keep our show's lights on. You can check out all of the links in the show notes where you can find our schedule, our Patreon, our previous episodes, our websites, all of our social media accounts, all in one very convenient location.
You read that.
But we would also like to take a second to thank our new mixologist, Star.
Woohoo! Thanks for...
is amazing, and it's great to have you in on the Discord server, and anybody who wants to could be just as amazing as Star, maybe as amazing as Star, if you were to do the same.
Perhaps. Yeah. Perhaps. Join us for all the various live events and all the other shows that we do, so we really appreciate that, of course. As PJ had mentioned earlier, you can find us on Patreon, previous things, everything like that. But if you want to search us out specifically, Words Whiskey Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, wordsandwhiskeyshow@gmail.com. If you want to send us any kind of questions, thoughts, or anything about the episodes that you love or enjoy, we're going to see more from. We'd love to hear from you guys every time we do. So really appreciate it. You can check us out and support us, as PJ had mentioned, patreon.com/wordsandwhiskey. And we have t-shirts on TeePublic for the moment. That link is available inside of our show notes. So definitely check that out. Beyond that, we are so glad to have you guys. We're so glad to be back. I mean, I know that it was effectively just like a week break, but I'm very glad to be back doing this consistently again after the 2-week break of busting my hand and everything else. So
we're almost to the point where you get to write notes again.
Yeah, big thank you to PJ for picking up my editing slack in more show than one, but greatly appreciate that. And see you guys next week. We're going to end that. You know what? I do want to tease something else. I think maybe we had talked about this before, but if not, this book, we will be having a guest to wrap up the story. Alloy of Law, I felt like it was so short, quick, easy. That didn't die. I mean, if we could have found someone that made sense, we would have probably done it. But I mean, it was a quick, easy, breezy read. This one, I feel like, makes a lot of sense, especially being the first book in a trilogy that we want to wrap up and talk about and everything like that. So we're having Overly Average Ben from YouTube join us to talk about Shadows of Self. Not this week, mind you, or not next week, mind you, but the week following. So we're very excited to have that little wrap up to discuss this excellent entry in Mistborn.
Yeah, super exciting.
Should be a very good time for everyone involved. Mm-hmm. Yes. Quite. Yes. Cool. With that, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.